Hi guys! Tonight we ease into the soft dusk drifting over the start of the Oregon Trail, and you let your shoulders drop as the last warmth of Independence, Missouri, slides behind you. You can almost feel the ruts under your boots, those deep wagon grooves that have already swallowed thousands of dreams. Dust hangs in the air, and your oxen snort in that low, grumbling way that tells you they are tired before you even begin. And you know the truth. If you were actually out here, you probably will not survive this. People joked about it later, but the danger was real, sitting quietly in every shadow and under every starlit ridge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me your location and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. You move forward into the growing darkness. Evening settles over the wagon line as if someone pulled a great blanket out of the sky and let it drift down onto you. The trail looks strangely different at this hour, and it is not only because the daylight is gone. Everything seems amplified. Footsteps crunch a little louder, breath seems a little sharper, and the faint creak of a wagon wheel feels like it echoes for miles. Settlers before you knew this sensation well. They understood that nighttime was both a welcome pause and a quiet threat. After all, once the sun dipped, the animals hunting the open plains woke up, winds shifted, and the loneliness of the frontier grew teeth. You settle your pack on your shoulder and take in the scent of early camp smoke. It curls lazily upward from a few advance fires, each one licking at the cool air as though hungry. Campfires on the early parts of the trail were a practical necessity, but they also worked as a kind of congregation point. People edged toward them instinctively. Humans always have. Warmth, light, and the illusion of safety. A mainstream historical fact that surprises many is that the Oregon Trail season demanded early starts and early stops because travelers needed as many usable daylight hours as possible for progress and repairs. That meant nights were long, slow, and heavy with both preparation and fear. But right now you are not thinking about fear. You are adjusting to the rhythm, the way the day hands you off to the night. You watch the last wagon roll into its resting place. The animals stamp and shake off sweat, little puffs of earthy scent drifting around their flanks. You hear a baby crying, then a mother sushing in a practiced cadence that blends with the distant hooting of an owl. These sounds melt together into something oddly calming. You feel yourself sink deeper into the moment. As you kneel to check your own pack, you catch yourself wondering how well you will really sleep out here on this open land with no solid walls and no neighbors close enough to hear you if something goes wrong. That feeling is exactly what early settlers wrestled with nightly. Many were from towns or small farms where community was a few minutes' walk away. Out here, the nearest friendly voice might be several hundred yards down the wagon line, which in darkness feels like the far side of the world. You shift your weight to the other knee, brushing away a pebble. The dirt is powdery from a long day of travel. You can feel how dry it is, how easily it lifts in the slightest breeze. And you remember reading somewhere that some settlers rubbed a thin layer of this dust on their skin at night because they believed it masked human scent from predators. Historians still argue whether this practice was effective or even widespread, but the very idea hints at how deeply nighttime survival lived in people's minds. The sun finally slips away. The sky dims into shades of smoke, blue, purple, and then something close to velvet black. Stars appear like cold pinpricks, slow at first, then all at once as if someone opened a shutter. You inhale the cooling air and hear your breath as a soft whisper. A dog trots past your feet and pauses, sniffing the air in a way that makes you wonder what it can detect that you cannot. Dogs on the trail were more than companions. They were casual security systems, early indicators of approaching animals or strangers. The fact that they were often mutts did not change their usefulness. You stand again and join the others who move toward the central area of camp. Lantern light wobbles across faces. People look tired, but there is also relief in their expressions. The day is done. For many, that was enough to feel momentarily safe. A few are already unrolling bedding, shaking blankets free of dust, and choosing sleeping spots with care. Every wagon family had its own approach to nighttime positioning. Some preferred to sleep underneath or inside the wagon for protection from weather. Others slept on the ground, curling into blankets and hoping that exhaustion would knock them out before their imagination conjured dangers in every rustling leaf. Someone beside you murmurs about the chance of rain, and you tilt your head back to study the clouds. They are thin, stretched like gauze across the sky. Not a threat, at least, Not tonight. One quirky bit of lore you recall is that some travelers judged weather entirely by how their oxen acted during the evening. If the oxen seemed restless or kept pushing their noses into the wind, people interpreted it as a sign of approaching storms. Whether that instinct was real or imagined is still up for debate. You hoist your blanket, roll under your arm, and shift toward a small fire that pops and crackles at a steady rhythm. A few people are sitting around it, stirring a pot of something that smells like beans and bacon. You can feel the heat kiss your knees as you draw closer. This is where settlers traded news, told jokes, and made last-minute plans for the following day. There was always something to fix or adjust, from wheel spokes to harness straps. The firelight flickers across their faces, giving them a warm glow, even though you can sense the bone-deep fatigue behind their smiles. You sit for a moment, letting the heat seep into your palms. The flames feel hypnotic, the kind of soft, warm motion that lulls you toward sleep, even though you still have more to prepare. You hear someone retelling the story of a traveler who lost his boots to a coyote because he left them too close to his sleeping spot. A few laugh. Someone else shakes their head. You think about your own boots and make a mental note not to repeat that mistake. Eventually you rise and step away from the fire. The ground feels cooler now, almost damp. You search for a sleeping place that is slightly elevated, not too close to the wagons because creaking wood can drive you mad, but not so far that you feel exposed. When you finally choose a spot, you crouch down and spread your blanket. The fabric brushes your fingertips with a familiar roughness. The night air smells faintly of dried grass and wood smoke. You can hear the murmur of voices behind you fading into softer, slower tones. As you settle in, lying back and letting your body sink into the earth, you notice how the darkness presses close. It is not unfriendly, just dense, like a heavy curtain. It wraps around you, and you feel yourself drifting into that liminal space where thought becomes something loose and hazy. You understand, suddenly, why early settlers feared and respected this hour. Nighttime was a teacher. It reminded them how small they were, how far from home they had traveled, how vast and indifferent the continent could be. Yet you also feel the comfort they must have felt. The group is near you. The wagons form a loose boundary. The fire is still burning, and deep down you sense the truth they carried every night. Danger is real, but so is resilience. The wind softens, the stars sharpen, and your breathing slows. The night has claimed you, and the long journey has truly begun. You rise a little earlier than you expected, not because anyone wakes you, but because your body senses the shift in the camp. Even in half darkness, you recognize that this has become a kind of rhythm already. People stir, kettles clink, and horses snort as though greeting the dawn with impatience. But tonight the light is fading again, and you are learning the ritual from the other side of the day. Evening is settling, and it is time to choose where the camp will sleep. You stretch your shoulders, feeling the ache of yesterday, and you walk with the others who wander outward to scan the surrounding land. You realize that this simple act of picking ground determines whether you sleep safely or toss and turn with worry. Choosing nightly ground was one of the most important tasks settlers faced. Even if the region looked peaceful, trouble could exist only a few feet beneath the grass. You kneel and pinch the soil between your fingers. It is sandy here, dry and light, and you recognize that it would not hold puddles. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your mind. Wagon parties averaged 15 to 20 miles a day and often camped near water, but water usually meant insects, soft ground, and an increased chance of nighttime animal traffic. The trick was finding balance, close enough to refill barrels in the morning, but far enough to avoid being awakened by mosquitoes singing around your ears. You walk a little farther. The air cools as shadows stretch over the prairie. You look for subtle dips in the land that could become sudden puddles if a surprise storm rolls through in the night. Flash floods were not rare in certain regions, and some parties learned the hard way that a calm evening could become a dangerous torrent long before morning. One quirky detail you have heard mentioned is that a few travelers believed they could predict ground stability by listening for frogs at dusk. If frogs croaked loudly, it meant hidden marshy pockets were nearby. Historians still argue whether this trick had any reliability at all, but it is the sort of small superstition that grows naturally when people live outdoors for months at a time. You move along a faint ridge, your boots brushing against tall grass that sways with the coming night breeze. You place a hand on your knee, leaning to scan for animal burrows or holes. A broken ankle out here could alter the fate of an entire wagon line. Every footfall has meaning. Every rut conceals risk. On the Oregon Trail, decisions about where to sleep were not personal. They were communal and often debated. You can almost hear those old arguments echoing around you. Someone worrying about wolves, someone else swearing that the real threat is a storm, someone insisting on a flatter patch because their wagon axle is cracked. Tiny negotiations shaped every evening. You tilt your head upward and see birds crossing overhead, dark silhouettes heading toward distant tree lines where they will shelter from the night. You breathe in and catch the faint odor of mud from the nearby river. It is close enough that you hear the steady rush of water, but not so close that it drowns out other sounds. You understand why water tempted travelers to camp near it. If you choose too far from a river, you start the morning already tired because you need to haul heavy buckets back to the wagons before even setting out. But if you choose too near, you become vulnerable to wildlife that also depends on the water. You remember reading that settlers sometimes placed their wagons on slightly sloping inclines, so any nighttime rain flowed downhill instead of pooling around their bedrolls. You crouch and check the angle of the ground, appreciating how even small choices become serious strategy out here. You hear the laughter of two teenagers comparing the ground with sticks, debating whether it is firm enough to hold tents. They scrape the soil, each of them pretending to be some expert scout. You cannot help smiling because their energy cuts through the tension. But even their game reminds you that stakes were high. A wagon tongue could snap if the earth was too soft. Horses might stumble. Livestock could wander into holes. You feel the weight of these details as you walk back toward the wagons. The camp leader, or at least the closest thing to one, stands near a patch of slightly elevated grass and declares this will be tonight's home. You do not argue. You look around and realize this spot checks several boxes. It is open enough for a clear line of sight in multiple directions. It has a slight rise that protects against surprise pools of water, and it sits far enough from riverbank noise that sleep might be easier. The choice feels good. You nod subtly, as though giving your quiet approval. You watch as other settlers move out to mark the boundaries of the camp. They place lanterns around the perimeter, not too bright, but enough to show where the living space ends and the night beyond begins. The lantern glow warms the air in soft circles. You step closer and feel how the evening breeze shifts around your clothing. The scent of crushed grass rises where people walk. Everything about this moment feels alive. You hear a woman behind you mutter a short complaint about how rocks always seem to find their way into the places people want to sleep. She kicks one aside with surprising force. Someone else jokes that the rocks are following her, hiding under every blanket she puts down. You laugh because humor is part of how fear is softened here. It floats through the air like another layer of warmth. Now that the ground is chosen, you notice how the mood of the camp changes instantly. People begin to settle into the tasks that come after scouting. Fires are built, animals are driven in a small loop to check for injuries. Children chase each other before being pulled gently back to help gather wood. The entire scene looks almost choreographed, but you know it is not. It is survival shaped into a nightly routine. As more people examine the chosen spot, they stomp the earth with their heels to gauge firmness. You kneel again, brushing your fingers across the uneven surface. You imagine how dozens of travelers before you felt this same ground and made similar judgments. You think about the stories you have heard where wagons tipped over in the night because the soil shifted under them. Some accounts say that settlers piled stones near their wheels for stability. Others insisted that careful selection was enough. Scholars still debate whether such stone bracing was common practice or just an occasional solution for difficult terrain. You take a deep breath. The air tastes clean and cool, touched by the scent of distant pine. It carries the sounds of clattering pots and low conversation as you return to the main area. The chosen space feels correct. Your body feels lighter. You do not know if the land approves of you, but at least it is willing to hold you through the night. Night falls more fully now. The sky deepens and small insects hum their small evening music. You kneel near your wagon, smoothing the ground before laying out your bedding. Each motion is slow, careful, almost ritualistic. This is how settlers made safety for themselves. They did not own the land. They negotiated with it every day. As you finish preparing your sleeping place, you hear a call from someone volunteering for first watch. Voices respond with gratitude. The perimeter lanterns flicker in agreement, and the whole camp seems to exhale as if simultaneously relieved by the decision. You sit on your blanket for a moment and let your hands rest on your knees. The earth is solid beneath you. The camp is settling. Danger exists, but for now, you have chosen the best ground you can. You breathe deeply again, tasting quiet, letting the vastness around you feel less threatening and more like a companion. The night is here, and you are ready to lie down upon the land that has agreed, at least for now, to hold you safely. You feel the camp adjusting itself again as the last blush of twilight sinks below the horizon. People begin drifting toward the wagons, their silhouettes stretching long across the grass as the brightness drains from the sky. Tonight, you watch a familiar ritual take shape, one you have already heard others mention with a blend of practicality and superstition. The wagons begin to turn, their wooden frames groaning gently as animals pull them into a loose ring. You step closer, listening to the thud of hooves and the crackle of lantern flames. The circle is not tight, not like a fortress, but it is intentional. You can see why settlers believed it mattered. You place your hand on a wagon wheel and feel the warmth still clinging to the wood from the day's travel. The circle forms slowly, like a great wheel turning around you. Some people joke that it looks like a giant corral for humans. Others glance nervously outward into the gloaming, clearly reassured by the growing enclosure. And as you observe the process, you realize something important. The circle is as much for the mind as for the body. Many diaries from the era describe how arranging wagons this way helped parties feel anchored to one another, especially when night stretched out like an ocean over the plains. A detail often highlighted by trail historians is that wagon circles were not always meant for battle strategy. They did help contain livestock, and they created a clear center for communal tasks, but they were rarely intended as true defensive walls. The iconographic Hollywood version oversold the idea. In reality, the circling was generally a matter of organization and psychological unity. You can picture weary families stepping inside the ring each evening and letting their shoulders drop, as if entering a temporary village built out of determination and wooden spokes. You watch now as a woman adjusts the position of her wagon, guiding her oxen gently by tapping their shoulders. Dust rises around their legs in soft clouds. Another man shouts instructions across the growing semicircle. You hear a metallic clank as someone checks a coupler pin. The sound echoes pleasantly in the cooling air. You join in by pushing against a wagon tailboard to nudge it into a better angle. The wood trembles under your palms, and the faint resin smell seeps up into your nose. It is oddly comforting. The ring tightens. Lanterns glow along the perimeter like a string of low stars. The light pools around the wagons, creating an inner world distinct from the dark prairie beyond. You can feel the subtle relief sliding into the group as each wagon settles into its place. In these moments, you sense how the shape of the camp influences what people feel is possible. With the ring complete, everyone appears a little less exposed. A woman near you murmurs that the circle reminds her of the shepherding practices her grandmother taught in the Appalachian foothills. Keep the flock close. Make a boundary. She smiles at you, brushing her hair behind her ear, and continues hauling a bucket toward the central fire. Her comment lingers with you because it reveals how settlers brought old-world instincts into this new land, blending tradition with improvisation. You adjust the hitch pin of your own wagon and glance outward. The prairie lies still, save for the soft sway of grass catching the wind. Insects hum a monotonous but somehow steadying rhythm. A coyote yips far off, the sound thin and reedy. You think about tales you have heard where travelers believed that arranging wagons in a ring confused predators by disrupting their natural paths across the land. Whether this was true or wishful thinking remains a matter of discussion among researchers today, but the belief persisted, shaping countless campsites along the trail. You continue helping others find their exact places in the formation. Some wagons have noisy wheels, others tilt slightly from uneven packing. You step beside one wagon where a boy is adjusting the brake lever. He tells you proudly that their family wagon has a custom-made locking mechanism carved by his father. He insists it keeps their belongings safer at night. You crouch down and take a closer look. It is rough, but clever. The boy beams when you nod in approval. You are reminded that innovation thrived along the trail because problems demanded immediate solutions. As you step around the growing circle, you catch sight of a small group of travelers arguing quietly. One wants the ring tighter, another prefers a wider gap. You walk past them, listening to their reasons. The first is convinced that a narrower circle limits the angles from which trouble can approach. The second argues that a wider space prevents wagons from catching fire if someone tips a lantern. Their voices carry the cadence of people who have spent long days in the sun, tired, yet fiercely protective of their routines. There is no single correct answer. Accounts from the era show that wagon formations varied considerably, depending on terrain, weather, group size, and leadership style. You stroll back toward the center of the camp and let your gaze follow the circle's shape. It is not perfect. Some wagons sit slightly askew. One forms a small gap where the driver misjudged the angle. Another leans because a wheel rim cracked earlier in the day, but the imperfections give the ring character. Its shape is as human as those who built it, and that, strangely enough, comforts you. You listen as a teenager climbs atop one wagon and theatrically scans the horizon, pretending to be on lookout duty. His friends laugh. A woman playfully throws a bit of dried grass at him and tells him to get down before he falls and breaks a rib. The laughter ripples outward, blending with the low murmur of others preparing supper. The circle, incomplete moments ago, now feels like a home stitched together by shadows and lamplight. As you walk along its inner curve, your fingertips graze the wooden sides of each wagon. The surfaces are textured with travel scars, scratches, splinters. Some wagons have names painted on them. The Starlight Bell, the Whisper Wind. One simply says Hope. Another bears a crude handprint in faded red paint. You pause there and imagine the person who made that mark, perhaps a child leaving a personal touch on the journey. You step back to observe again. The campfire at the center glows brighter now, as more people feed it with brush and deadfall. Sparks float upward like fireflies escaping into the night. You hear pots rattling, spoons clinking, children whispering stories to one another. The ring amplifies these sounds, holding them close, instead of letting them scatter into the empty plains. In this way, the formation becomes more than a boundary. It becomes a vessel collecting the small noises of life, gathering them into an audible reminder that no one here is alone. Somewhere near your right shoulder, a man clears his throat and remarks that the wagon circle looks especially tight tonight. He explains that drivers often nudged wagons closer on evenings when they felt uneasy about the land, sometimes after spotting unfamiliar footprints or hearing movement along the grass line. His tone is matter-of-fact, not fearful. You can tell he has ridden this trail before. First-timers listen closely, absorbing his wisdom as though the shape of the circle might shield them from the unknowns of the night. You finally take a seat near the base of your wagon, resting your back against its wheel. You stretch your legs and let the nearby fire warm your shins. The circle stands silent behind you, a wooden ribcage around the heart of the camp. You close your eyes briefly and sense the stability it offers. It is not impenetrable, it is not foolproof, but it is a choice made together, a gesture of unity carved into the landscape. Even the imperfections feel functional, like a patchwork quilt whose strength comes from being sewn by many hands. A gentle breeze sweeps through the camp, lifting strands of your hair. The air smells faintly of sage and wood smoke. You breathe in deeply and feel the night settling into the folds of the wagons. The circle now holds everything inside it. The resting animals, the simmering pots, the hushed laughter, the shared hopes of the people who chose to cross these vast lands. And you too. The sky darkens fully. Stars blink awake one by one, clustering in patterns that guided wanderers long before the trail was carved. You look at the ring a final time. It stands secure, imperfect but intentional. And you understand why settlers believed that sleep came more easily inside this embrace of wood and willpower. You pull your blanket closer and let the quiet fortify you. The circle is complete, and night, in all its vastness, feels just a little smaller because of it. You sense the camp beginning to downshift again. Like a great machine easing into its nighttime hum, the wagon circle holds steady. Lanterns glow along its edges, and the central fire flickers against the rising dark. People murmur softer now, the way voices naturally settle when the world around them becomes a little too big and a little too quiet. Tonight it is your turn to join the watch rotation, and even before someone calls your name, you already know it. There is a familiar tightening in your shoulders, a mix of pride and the tiniest hint of dread. Taking a night watch on the Oregon Trail was not a glamorous task. It was a duty carved from necessity, shaped by long days and even longer uncertainties. You brush dust from your trousers as you rise, feeling the earth cool beneath your feet. A kettle lid snaps shut behind you as someone finishes cleaning dishes. A child whimpers sleepily. A horse snorts from the far side of the ring. These small sounds remind you why people took turns guarding the night. They were not protecting themselves alone. They were keeping safe a fragile web of families, animals, supplies, and hope. Someone hands you a lantern. Its glass is warm, dimmed intentionally so it will not blind your night sight. You peer through the smoky glow and watch the embers of the central fire breathe in slow pulses. People are settling for the night, laying out blankets and rolling jackets to use as pillows. A well-documented detail from trail diaries notes that watch shifts often rotated every 2 hours because exhaustion ran too deep for anyone to stay alert much longer. You feel that truth in your bones already. The idea of walking in slow circles while others drift into sleep seems noble, but it is also heavy with monotony. A man named Robert nods toward you, his expression a blend of sympathy and encouragement. He has just finished the previous shift. Sweat beads along his hairline, even though the air is cool. He tells you that he heard distant hoofbeats about an hour ago, but could not tell whether they belonged to wild mustangs or grazing cattle from a distant group. His uncertainty does not alarm you. Stories from the period mention how often sounds on the plains blended with distance and wind, turning certainty into guesswork. You thank him and take your post. You walk toward the outer edge of the wagon circle, letting the lantern hang low. The light grazes your boots and paints the grass in faint amber streaks. The prairie beyond lies open and dark, stretching into a horizon so wide it feels like the sky is leaning down to greet you. You allow your eyes to adjust. Shapes shift in the moonlight. You blink and they become still again. It is surprising how easily your own mind becomes a trickster out here. As you make your first circuit, you become attuned to the subtle movements inside the camp. Wagons creak as wood cools. Someone coughs softly. A dog paddles in its sleep and yelps once, then settles. The ring is alive, even when everyone rests. You tighten your grip on the lantern handle and keep moving. The quiet carries a weight that presses gently at your temples. Halfway around the circle, you pause to listen. The breeze changes direction, snapping lightly at your collar. Somewhere to your left, tall grass rustles. You lean forward slightly, narrowing your eyes. A rabbit darts out and scurries into the dark. Your lungs loosen again. Travelers often wrote about how their imaginations magnified small noises during the night, turning harmless animals into imagined threats. One lesser-known curiosity appears in a few journals. People claimed that prairie hares sometimes sat completely still and stared at humans in the dark, which spooked a few weary guards into thinking they were being watched by something more dangerous. You smile at the memory of reading that and shake off the tension. You continue along the arc of the wagons. Your lantern flickers as the fuel settles. You adjust the wick and keep walking. It is easy to feel alone while on guard duty, even when dozens of sleeping souls lie just yards away. You remind yourself that others walked these circuits before you, night after night, through storms and fog and eerie silences. Some researchers still debate whether larger parties were actually safer or simply noisier targets, but most agree that the shared responsibility of the watch helped maintain morale on difficult stretches of the trail. A distant wolf howl floats across the plains. It is long, hollow, and far away, but it tucks itself into your spine anyway. The sound is not threatening but ancient, like something that predates every wagon wheel in the camp. You hold still, letting the note fade. Then you breathe again and move on. You glance toward the nearest wagon and see a woman stirring in her sleep, perhaps reacting to the same sound. She shifts under her blanket but does not wake. At the northern edge of the circle, you switch hands with the lantern, giving your wrist a break. The night air feels different here, sharper, carrying hints of sage from the nearby brush. You kneel briefly to examine some tracks in the dirt, though you know they are from your own party's livestock earlier in the day. You stand again and sweep the dark horizon with your eyes. The moon hangs like a pale coin, offering just enough light to make out distant contours, but not enough to erase your uncertainty. You recall hearing old travelers say that night watch teaches you how small a human can feel, yet how responsible one can become at the same time. Watching the sleeping camp now, you understand it completely. Each person resting inside the ring trusts someone like you to stay awake. That trust is heavier than the lantern in your hand. As the minutes stretch into an hour, your legs grow tired. You walk slower, your eyelids tug downward. You curse softly under your breath and force yourself to straighten your posture. Fatigue is the silent enemy of a night guard. Even the most disciplined travelers fell prey to drowsiness. One traveler's journal mentions tying a thin rope loosely around the wrist and hooking it to a wagon spoke, so that if the guard nodded off, the tug would jolt them awake. Whether that trick worked consistently remains uncertain among those who study trail customs, but it reveals how creative people became in their struggle against sleep. You take a deep breath and resume your path. The quiet has shifted again, settling into an almost dreamlike softness. The lantern glow pulses, warm against your thigh. You think about telling others tomorrow how the watch felt. You imagine them nodding with understanding, sharing their own stories about moments when they thought they saw something move in the grass or caught a sudden chill for no clear reason. Turning the last bend of the circle, you spot another guard emerging from the shadows. It is the man assigned to relieve you. He lifts his lantern in silent greeting. You exhale through your nose, feeling tension leave your shoulders. You give him a brief report. Nothing unusual, only wildlife chatter and shifting winds. He nods patiently. You can see the determination in his tired eyes. He will pace the circle just as you did, fighting his own sleep, listening for anything that seems out of place. You surrender your lantern and step back into the inner part of the camp. The fire has dimmed to warm orange coals. You rub your arms and feel the night's coolness burrow into your sleeves. As you settle near your wagon, the world seems quieter than before. Your shift is done. Someone else is watching now. The trust has transferred. You lower yourself onto your blanket, letting your muscles unwind. Your heartbeat slows, sinking to the faint rustle of grass and the breathing of the camp around you. You stretch your legs once and close your eyes. The watch has taught you something important. Fear exists, yes, but vigilance shapes it into something manageable, and even on the darkest nights, you do not face that fear alone. Sleep begins to pull you under, soft as silk. You drift awake again as the camp shifts into its next evening rhythm, a soft choreography of footsteps and murmured voices. Tonight, as shadows lengthen and the prairie opens itself to the cool breath of dusk, your attention settles on something deceptively simple, yet deeply significant: the placement of the campfires. You rise slowly, brushing dust from your palms, and walk toward the central area where people are gathering wood, arranging stones, and crouching over tinder as though performing a quiet ritual. Fire on the Oregon Trail was more than warmth. It was identity. It was a beacon. And, when used poorly, it was also a risk. You can feel the intensity of the choices being made. Families had to decide where flames should burn, how high, how many, and how visible they ought to be beyond the protective curve of the wagons. You kneel beside a traveler gently coaxing sparks from a flint and steel. The glow flutters weakly at first, then catches with a dry sigh. You lend a hand by steadying the tinder bundle. It smells of sun-baked grass and faint resin. As the first little flame curls upward, the man nods with gratitude. Accounts from the period consistently note that people arranged fires methodically to balance light, warmth, and security. Too much light invited attention from afar. Too little left the camp vulnerable to predators and unseen hazards. You stand again and watch as others bring in armfuls of branches. Someone passes you a bundle of sagebrush twigs. Their earthy fragrance fills the air as you toss them onto the designated pile. A woman laughs lightly, explaining that she prefers sage smoke because it keeps biting insects away and reminds her of home. The detail sparks a memory. In some trail journals, travelers describe tossing specific herbs, seeds, or even bits of dried fruit peel into the flames, believing the scents kept nighttime creatures at bay. Whether these beliefs had scientific merit remains uncertain, but they speak to the ingenuity of people who lived with the land rather than above it. As more fires flicker to life, you notice how carefully they are positioned. None sit directly against wagon wheels, and each one rests within a ring of stones or scraped dirt. You crouch near one of the fire pits, running your fingers across the smoothed circle where grass has been cleared away. The earth is cool, clean of debris, and ready to receive the heat. You remember reading that many travelers learned these precautions from frontier veterans who understood just how easily a stray ember could leap into a wagon canvas and turn an entire camp into a tinderbox. Even one tiny spark could undo months of hardship and miles of progress. A boy nearby gathers long sticks to serve as fire pokers. He waves one proudly like a sword before handing it to a woman stirring a pot of beans. She chuckles and warns him that dinner tastes better when the cook is not being stabbed in the leg by an enthusiastic helper. You smile, absorbing the warmth of these small human moments. They ground the vastness of the prairie and soften the edges of danger. As the fires grow brighter, they form islands of light scattered across the inner ring of camp. People gravitate toward them instinctively. You walk to the edge of one and let its warmth reach your hands. Flames dance in unpredictable spirals, painting your skin in orange and gold. You inhale deeply, catching the scent of burning grass and wood. Heat radiates upward, comforting, lively, hypnotic. You take a step back and observe from a slight distance. The geometry of the fires matters. Each one is spaced just enough, so light pools overlap, but do not merge completely. This balance creates gentle shadows between them, allowing people to rest without feeling exposed, while still keeping visibility along the ground. A number of accounts from travelers make special note of how fire placement influenced the behavior of animals passing nearby. Larger predators sometimes avoided the glow entirely. Deer, on the other hand, were known to stand just beyond the firelight, curious and unbothered. Even today, researchers examining frontier patterns suggest that the placement of fires helped regulate nighttime fauna traffic. You shift your attention outward, beyond the wagon circle. The darkness there feels thicker now that the fires cast their glow behind you. Shadows ripple like silent waves. You understand why settlers debated how bright their campfires should be. Some feared attracting attention from faraway groups. Others insisted that darkness created its own kind of vulnerability. In many recorded recollections, people mention fierce evening debates about whether to bank the flames low or let them burn generously. The decision varied from night to night, terrain to terrain, mood to mood. A pair of older men sit near one of the fires now, discussing the wind direction. If it shifts too much, smoke will blow into sleeping areas and irritate tired noses. But if it blows outward, it might carry scents the group would rather keep contained. You sit near them, listening to the low rumble of their conversation. One man taps a stick against a stone fire ring and claims that his father taught him never to place a fire too close to a line of tall grass, because wind can hide embers and ignite fires silently. The other man counters with a story from his cousin, who once faced a prairie windstorm that nearly swept their entire fire out of existence. Their voices blend into a comfortable banter, rich with experience. You shift your gaze to the central fire where people prepare supper. Pots simmer gently. A spoon clinks against metal. Someone passes you a tin cup of warm broth that smells like onion and salted pork. You sip it and feel warmth coat your throat. The fire pops, sending sparks upward like tiny ascending stars. You tilt your head back to watch them fade into the night. A curious detail mentioned in some pioneer letters comes to mind. Travelers sometimes arranged fires in pairs, with one dedicated strictly to cooking and the other to providing watch illumination. The logic was that separating tasks reduced the chance of accidental burns and allowed guards to stand near a steady light source while the cooks worked uninterrupted. Whether this method was widely adopted continues to generate small debates among enthusiasts of frontier life, but the idea reflects how adaptable people had to be. You walk toward the far end of camp, where a smaller fire flickers beside a wagon with fading paint. A woman sits alone, mending a shirt by lantern glow. She glances up as you approach and offers a nod before returning to her stitching. Her fire is small, fed by only a few twigs. You ask why she keeps it so low, and she explains gently that a dim flame keeps her calm. Too much brightness reminds her of the city she left behind. You listen quietly, letting her words float into the flames. Personal preference, you realize, shaped many fire decisions. Trail culture was not one uniform rulebook. It was a tapestry of choices woven from need, instinct, memory, and mood. You drift back toward the central area, where laughter from a group setting their firewood into neat stacks rings softly through the night. Someone begins humming. Another person taps their foot. Children nibble at pieces of cornbread while leaning close to the warmth. Flames twirl higher, then settle again, as if breathing in harmony with the camp. The prairie night continues to fold itself around the wagons. Your eyes adjust, appreciating the glowing halos cast by the fires. They remind you of tiny hearths scattered across a frontier that remains wild and unpredictable. They reveal just enough to comfort but not enough to erase mystery. As the fire nearest you crackles, you understand something deeper. The placement of these flames is not just about safety, it is about presence. Each fire tells the prairie, and anyone watching from afar, that humans are here and alive, that they claim this temporary piece of land until morning, that they have not surrendered their warmth to the night. You lower yourself onto the ground and wrap your blanket around your shoulders. The fire offers a steady heartbeat of light. You let your gaze soften and your breathing slow. Conversations quiet, sparks drift upward. The night deepens. The camp settles into a warm, glowing constellation of small suns. And slowly, under the gentle glow of the fires arranged with such care, you feel sleep beginning to unfurl within you like a leaf opening at dawn. You stretch your arms as the fires dim to gentler embers, and the camp transitions from busy evening motion into something quieter, softer, almost sacred. Now comes one of the most personal nightly tasks on the trail, setting up the place where you will actually sleep. You gather your blankets, your rolled jacket, and the handful of items that stand between you and the cold ground. The earth feels both inviting and unyielding beneath your boots as you kneel to begin crafting tonight's bed. It is humbling how much thought goes into something as simple as lying down. Out here, bedding is not merely a comfort, it is strategy. You brush your hand over the soil, feeling its temperature, noticing the faint grit left behind by a day's worth of footsteps. Settlers learned quickly that the land itself decided how well they rested. You kneel and unfasten the ties securing your bedroll. The fabric smells of sun, sweat, and long travel. You shake it out, letting stray bits of prairie grass scatter into the night breeze. In numerous written recollections from the period, travelers described how bedding changed with the terrain beneath them. Some nights the ground felt packed and dry, other nights spongy or uneven. People layered blankets, coats, buffalo hides, or stray sacks of grain to create makeshift mattresses tailored to whatever nature offered. Tonight you press your palm flat against the ground again, checking for buried rocks or sharp roots. Even the smallest stone becomes a torment after hours of trying to sleep. You smooth the soil with methodical strokes, shaping a shallow hollow for your hips. A trail veteran once told you that a good night's sleep begins with sculpting the ground, not the blanket. And when you feel how the contours line up with your body, you understand the wisdom. Someone to your left is preparing her own bedding beneath the wagon, sliding her blankets into the narrow shaded space to escape the wind. Others prefer the open air. Each sleeper has their own logic. Period travelers often mentioned that sleeping inside or beneath wagons could shield a person from sudden weather shifts, though it sometimes attracted insects drawn to the scent of wood and canvas. Whether the wagon offered more comfort or merely the illusion of safety became a topic of lively debate among many groups heading west. You lift your blanket and spread it carefully over the smoothed earth. The weave is rough against your fingertips but familiar. You kneel on it, testing the feel, then adjust the edges so they rest flat against the soil. Your breath forms small puffs in the cooling air. You exhale slowly, letting the day's tension melt outward like ripples on water. Nearby, two men tighten the ropes on their bedrolls, adding bundles of dried grass beneath the fabric for extra cushioning. You hear one teasing the other about stealing the softest grass from under the oxen's feet. They laugh, but the technique is real. Several trail narratives mention travelers gathering dry grass, pine boughs, or sagebrush leaves to create primitive padding. Whether these improvised layers offered real comfort varied, but many swore by them. You turn your attention to your own setup again. You unroll your additional blanket and fold it into a narrow rectangle that will serve as support for your head. Pillows were rare luxuries on the trail. More often, people used rolled jackets or folded sacks filled with spare clothing. Tonight, you choose the familiar comfort of your worn coat. Its shape presses into the side of your face with a kind of rough tenderness. The smells of nighttime settle over you. Earth, sage, lingering smoke, the faint musk of animals now settling into their own rest. You lift your face and feel the air cooling across your skin. It carries faint whispers from across camp, muted conversations, a giggle from a child resisting sleep, the rhythmic breathing of a nearby dog. As you lie down to test the bedding, the ground's unevenness becomes clear. You shift your weight, reposition your hips, gently stamp the turf with your heels to compress one stubborn bump. Travelers frequently mentioned performing this adjustment dance night after night. Good bedding was not about perfection. It was about negotiation. A woman walking past you pauses to remark that the night feels chillier than yesterday. She wraps her shawl tighter and tells you she once heard that some settlers placed heated stones beneath their blankets to stay warm. You nod, remembering that letters from several pioneers mention this method. The stones were warmed at the fire, wrapped in cloth, and tucked beneath bedding. Whether it kept people warm long enough to matter is still something experts discuss without firm consensus. But the practice reveals how people blended creativity with necessity. You lie back again, letting your shoulders sink into the fabric. The blankets insulate you slightly from the ground's coldness, but you can still feel the earth's quiet heartbeat beneath you. There is something grounding in that sensation. You breathe in the night air and blink slowly at the stars overhead. They shimmer like scattered silver dust caught in a grand, silent swirl. A rustle comes from the wagon behind you as someone adjusts their bedding and mutters with frustration about a lumpy patch of soil. You smile at the familiarity of the complaint. Even today, Modern campers often discover that no matter how good their gear is, the earth always has its own opinions about comfort. You roll slightly to your side and pat the ground as though you can coax it into being kind. Further across camp, a young couple attempts to stitch a tear in their shared blanket before bed. The woman holds the fabric tight, while her partner threads the needle with a dramatic squint. Their laughter drifts softly toward you, warm and infectious. You watch them for a moment and feel something tender settle in your chest. These small moments of domesticity transform the wilderness into something briefly gentle. Your own blanket rustles as you reposition it once more. You place your hand against the edge and feel its texture. The wool is coarse, the fibers stiff from repeated use, but there is comfort in its ruggedness. Many trail accounts emphasize how bedding became deeply personal. Blankets were not simply gear, they were symbols of home, of continuity, of warmth carried across an indifferent continent. You stretch your legs and inhale deeply, letting the night sounds gather around you. Somewhere beyond the wagons, an ox shifts its weight with a low groan. A few crickets sing in inconsistent rhythms. A faint gust brushes across the camp, lifting tiny curls of dust that dance briefly before settling again. You take one last look at your bedding setup. It is imperfect, yes, but it is ready. You have shaped the earth as best you can, layered your blankets with thought, prepared your small island of warmth against the cooling prairie. As you settle fully into it, you think about how many settlers before you performed these exact motions in the exact same fading light. The continuity echoes across time. Your body sinks slowly, your muscles unwinding. The night presses close, cool and deep. The ground cradles you in a way that feels both firm and forgiving. And under the endless sprawl of sky, you understand that this ritual of arranging bedding was an act of quiet resilience, a way of turning raw, unpredictable land into something temporarily gentle. You pull the blanket higher along your chest, your eyes flutter. The sounds of the camp become distant, blurred, soft. In this small, carefully prepared corner of the prairie, you feel rest rising toward you like a warm tide. Sleep waits patiently at your door. You settle deeper into your bedding as the sky darkens fully, and the edges of camp grow quieter. The fires soften into low, breathing embers, and the wagon circle becomes a shadowy shape against the horizon. It is in moments like this, when your body begins to surrender to stillness, that your ears sharpen. Every faint rustle takes on new meaning. You close your eyes for a moment, then open them again, listening with the same instinct settlers carried night after night on the Oregon Trail. Sound rules the dark out here. You breathe slowly, letting the night tune itself around you. The prairie seems alive with tiny pulses, the whisper of tall grass swaying, the drumming of insects, the occasional shuffle from the livestock, whose silhouettes bob against the firelight. You lift your head slightly, feeling the way the air vibrates with distant calls. Somewhere far off, a coyote yips. It is not a threatening sound, more like a lonely conversation carried on the wind. Still, it nudges your senses awake. Trail journals often mention how settlers became amateur sound interpreters over time. They learned which noises belonged to harmless creatures and which hinted at something more troubling. Tonight, you test yourself the same way. A soft skittering near your left ear makes you tense until you realize it is only a beetle navigating the grass. You flick it away gently, more amused than startled. In your mind flickers a story told by a traveler who once mistook a beetle crawling across his blanket for a rattlesnake. His terrified leap sent him straight into a pot of simmering stew. Accounts from the group say the laughter lasted for days. You sink back, letting the ground hold you. The camp's little symphony grows richer. A horse stamps its hoof twice. Someone murmurs in their sleep. A kettle lid rattles as it cools on the embers. The longer you listen, the more the sounds blend into a rhythm that feels almost orchestrated. It is strange how quickly your mind begins to assign meaning to this nighttime score. Even scholars who study frontier behavior note that interpreting sound was essential to survival, and often dictated when a camp should rise or stay hidden. Out here, noise is more informative than sight. A faint flutter catches your attention. You tilt your head, squinting into the darkness. A nightbird lifts off from the grass, beating its wings slowly as it disappears into the sky. The sound reminds you of a quiet broom sweeping dust from a floor. People crossing the trail often talked about birds as environmental guides. If birds remained active, the night was considered peaceful. If they went silent suddenly, it sometimes signaled larger disturbances. Whether that belief consistently held true remains a topic researchers explore today, but you can see why it became part of the traveler's shared knowledge. You draw your blanket closer and continue listening. The prairie wind shifts direction. It brushes past your cheeks like a cool hand in the dark. It picks up small threads of campfire smoke and carries them over you, combining with the scent of grass and faint traces of animal musk. Nights on the trail had their own perfume, one that clung to clothes, hair, and memory long after the journey ended. Then you hear it, a low, rolling growl, somewhere beyond the circle. You stiffen. The sound vibrates across the ground rather than slicing through the air, which is both unsettling and oddly fascinating. You hold your breath. The growl comes again, then fades. You sit up quietly, heart tapping a little faster. After a moment, you recognize the truth. It is the distant rumble of buffalo moving across the plains. Large herds often traveled at night, their footfalls mimicking thunder. Travelers wrote of waking to these sounds and feeling both awe and unease. Even a small herd could shake the earth like a passing storm. You release your breath and smile at your own reaction. It amazes you how quickly the unfamiliar becomes nerve-wracking, even knowing history. You lie back down and let the distant rumbling dissolve into the quiet. Another sound rises, this one closer. The dry rasp of grass parting under careful steps. You lift your head again, tense for a moment, before spotting the dark silhouette of a mule making its slow way toward a pile of leftover hay. You exhale. Animals often roamed around camp in the night. A few travelers even tied small bells to their livestock so they could track them by sound alone. Some accounts mention how the gentle jingling gave people comfort, though others insisted it ruined their sleep entirely. You close your eyes once more, letting your imagination soften its edges. The world beyond the wagons becomes a fluid dreamscape. You wonder what settlers felt hearing these same noises, without the reassurance of knowing how the story ends. They stepped into the night with a fragile kind of bravery, relying on their ears to tell them what their eyes could not see. A gentle tapping pulls you from your thoughts. Somewhere near the north end of camp, a loose piece of canvas flaps in the wind, creating a steady rhythm like fingers drumming on a tabletop. You listen closely, then let it blend into the background. Experienced travelers often said that once you memorized a camp's internal noises, you could more easily detect anything unfamiliar. You think about that now, cataloging each sound and sorting them into categories: harmless, neutral, curious, or alarming. Suddenly, a sharp crack splits the air. You shoot upright, heart leaping. The sound is unmistakable, a twig snapping under weight. You look toward the wagons, scanning for movement. The darkness thickens around the edges of your vision. You wait for another sign. Then it comes. A faint snort, followed by the soft thud of hooves. Relief floods your chest. It is only one of the oxen shifting in its yoke, perhaps irritated by an insect. Still, the moment reminds you how thin the line between calm and fear can be. You ease back down and breathe out slowly. The crack of that twig brings to mind a peculiar anecdote shared in a few letters from the era. Some travelers believed that snapping sounds in the night were messages from unsettled spirits. Others suspected prowling mountain lions. Many later admitted the culprit was usually a restless cow stepping on dry brush. The human imagination is a powerful force, especially when wrapped in darkness. The camp begins to soften even further as the night deepens. People drift fully into sleep. Conversations cease entirely. The fires shrink to quiet glows, barely illuminating the wagon wheels. The livestock settle. Dogs curl into tight shapes, their breaths forming little clouds in the cool air. Then you hear something more delicate. A single note, high and crystalline, carried on the breeze. It is the chirp of a lone night cricket. Another joins, then another. Soon the air hums with a fragile chorus. Many settlers mentioned that this chorus helped them fall asleep. The consistent rhythm reminded them of home, or at least of something familiar in a land constantly shifting around them. You let the insect song wash over you. Your heartbeat slows. The prairie shifts from mysterious to soothing. Sound becomes a blanket, warm and surprisingly tender. You let your mind wander while keeping your ears half alert. The night is alive, but not threatening. Each noise is part of the landscape's breathing, its quiet reassurance that the world continues to turn even while humans lie vulnerable beneath the stars. You sink deeper into your bedding. The stars blur slightly overhead, shimmering with that soft halo that appears when your eyelids grow heavy. The breeze whispers through the camp one last time, almost like a lullaby. As you drift toward sleep, you realize that listening to the dark is not about fear. It is about understanding. The plains speak constantly, and you, like the settlers before you, learn to hear the language of night. Your eyes close, the sounds remain, and slowly, they carry you across the threshold of dreams. You wake again, not fully and not with intention, but in that drifting halfway place where your mind floats while your body stays still. A soft murmur draws you upward from sleep. It is the sound of a child trying not to cry, a thin whimper tucked behind a wagon wheel. You shift slightly and watch as a mother lifts her little one into her lap, rocking gently in the moonlight. Her shawl gathers around them like a cocoon, and the faint glow of a dying ember highlights the curve of her arm as she rubs small circles on the child's back. Nights on the Oregon Trail were especially hard on children. The ground was unfamiliar, the noises endless, and the sheer openness of the prairie felt too large for young minds to understand. You push yourself up on your elbows, observing the scene quietly. The mother whispers about stars and warm pillows, and how tomorrow's sunrise will bring new adventures. Her tone is calm, soothing, shaped by a confidence she may not fully feel but offers anyway because children deserve that illusion. Many accounts from the era describe nights filled with restless little bodies crawling onto parents' blankets, not out of misbehavior but because nighttime stretched too wide, and fear seeped into the spaces between breaths. One historical memoir mentions a family whose children refused to fall asleep unless they held onto a corner of the wagon canvas, believing it tethered them to safety. You can imagine that now, watching the child's fingers curl into the fabric of their mother's shawl. You rise slowly, not wanting to disturb anyone, and walk toward a quieter corner of the camp, where another family has spread out their bedding. 3 children nestle together beneath a patched quilt, their legs tangled like roots beneath the soil. One child stirs, mumbling something unintelligible, and their older sibling hushes them with a gentle pat. You smile at the tenderness. Amid the harshness of the trail, siblings often became small guardians, holding each other through storms, fevers, and long nights under the open sky. You crouch nearby, watching a father adjust a blanket around his youngest child. The little one sniffles, rubbing tired eyes. The father murmurs something about brave explorers, a phrase that brings a faint grin to the child's face. You think back on a note scribbled in an old pioneer diary, where a parent wrote that storytelling became both entertainment and shield. Many children fell asleep listening to tales of heroic animals, magical mountains, or imaginary travelers who protected camps from danger. These stories were not just distractions, they were survival tools crafted from imagination. You settle down beside a wagon wheel and listen again. The child who cried earlier has quieted. The mother hums now, a soft lullaby that wanders across the camp like a breeze. The tune feels familiar even though you have never heard it before. Music, especially at night, was used sparingly by many travelers because they feared attracting unwanted attention. Yet small, private lullabies, carried in low tones, filled countless camps over the years. In one documented account, a family whispered songs in turns, passing the melody along like a treasured thread to keep their children calm through thunderstorms. A faint rustle behind you makes you turn. 2 parents are arranging a barrier of blankets around their sleeping children, draping them so the worst of the night wind stays out. The way the blankets sway reminds you of small tents, fabric shelters that transform raw ground into rooms. You approach quietly, and they explain that children often slept more soundly when cocooned in defined spaces. Something about creating boundaries made the vast prairie feel less overwhelming. Trail families improvised these tiny shelters, using shawls, coats, or wagon tarps. Contemporary researchers still discuss how these small fabric enclosures may have lessened children's nighttime anxiety. You stretch your legs and cross toward the far side of the wagon ring, where a group of older children sit near a low ember bed. They whisper stories to each other, passing time until sleep takes them. One child describes seeing a huge owl earlier, wings so wide it looked like a floating blanket. Another claims her boots were moved during supper by a mischievous prairie spirit. You hide a smile. Frontier children blended folklore and boredom into vivid narratives that helped them cope with long days and intimidating nights. These stories were playful, not fearful, a way of holding power over the unknown. You sit with them for a moment. One child offers you a piece of dried apple, its sweetness faint but welcome. He tells you he likes to sleep near a fire because the crackling reminds him of his grandmother's kitchen. Another child nods and admits he hates when the night grows too quiet because he starts imagining wolves sneaking between the wagons. His friend nudges him, insisting that wolves prefer deer to smelly boys. They laugh, tiny snorts of amusement breaking the stillness. As you listen, you think of a recollection shared by a traveling preacher who once wrote that children on the trail had sharper nighttime fears than adults, but also an astonishing resilience. In his writings, he noted how quickly a child shifted from trembling anxiety to total fascination at the sight of a shooting star or a glowing beetle. You see that same pattern here, in these tired yet curious faces that glow faintly in the ember light. A sudden gust of wind tugs at a wagon cover. The noise startles a toddler, who jolts awake with a wide-eyed gasp. The boy's mother scoops him into her arms, whispering assurances. He tucks his face into her neck, clutching her sleeve. You watch how she rubs slow circles on his back, grounding him with familiar touch. That gentle motion, you realize, probably soothed as many fears as any physical barrier or weapon. You step aside to allow her space and continue your quiet walk. A different family carefully checks the ground under their children's bedding. The father explains that they found a prickly weed beneath their blankets the previous night that kept one child awake in pain. He now combs the ground thoroughly each evening, determined not to repeat the mistake. That small detail reminds you of accounts where parents turned the nightly clearing of ground into a game. Children would help by hunting for the biggest rock or the sharpest stick, transforming fear into participation. A young girl nearby wraps her rag doll tightly in a scrap of fabric before tucking it under her arm. She whispers something to it, perhaps sharing secrets or giving it instructions on how to guard the night. Handmade dolls were treasured on the trail, providing emotional anchors for children separated from everything familiar. Some families stitched extra scraps onto the dolls after each milestone, marking progress along the journey. Whether every child believed these dolls protected them is uncertain, but many diaries mention how deeply attached children were to their small cloth companions. You pause near your bedding again and take in the whole scene. Parents murmuring, children snuggling into quilts, a handful of older kids still whispering stories. The camp's warmth, once centered on the fire, now radiates from clusters of families curled around one another like constellations. The night deepens further. Clouds drift lazily across the stars. The wind quiets. Children finally surrender to sleep, their breathing soft and rhythmic. You sense how vulnerable yet resilient they are, and you see clearly why adults on the trail went to such lengths to create a feeling of safety, even when actual safety was uncertain. Emotional comfort, it seems, mattered just as much as physical protection. You lie down again, pulling your blanket close. A final stir comes from a nearby wagon where a child mutters in a dream. The mother adjusts her shawl, pats the child's shoulder, and settles once more. Warmth hums around you, shaped by the quiet courage of families who learn to soothe fear with touch, voice, story, and presence. You close your eyes. The whispering fades. The last lullaby dissolves into the wind, and for a moment, the whole prairie seems to rest gently, cradling every sleeping child in its vast, patient hands. You ease yourself upright again, stretching your back as the moon slides higher in the sky. The camp has grown even quieter now, tucked into the late hours, when only the wind and the faint shuffling of animals remain awake. Your eyes drift toward the outer edge of the wagon circle where the livestock are gathered. Their silhouettes shift gently, rising and settling like slow waves. Tonight, your attention gravitates to them, because out here on the trail, sleep is never truly secure unless the animals are protected too. The oxen stand closest to the wagons, their massive bodies outlined in pale silver light. Beyond them, a few horses flick their tails lazily, brushing away insects. A pair of mules huddle near a makeshift feed bag. You walk toward them quietly, stepping lightly so as not to startle anything. Even in rest, livestock remain skittish. They know dangers long before humans do. Trail travelers often wrote that the security of the entire party rose or fell on the condition of these animals. Oxen pulled the wagons. Mules carried supplies. Horses offered scouting speed. Lose even won. And the consequences rippled instantly through the group. An observation shared by many diarists was that nighttime was when animals were most vulnerable. Predators hunted then. Storms struck without warning. Spooked animals bolted easily. People tied ropes, checked harnesses, adjusted hobbles, and prayed the night would pass quietly. You approach one of the oxen now, a broad creature with a mottled coat and a gentle sway to its head. Its breath forms a white cloud that drifts upward before dissolving into the cool darkness. You run your hand along its flank, feeling the warmth of its body beneath rough fur. The animal shifts, snorts softly, then settles again. You murmur a quiet reassurance, the kind settlers used instinctively. Animals, after all, shared the journey as much as people, and they too needed comfort. You look at the ropes staked into the ground. They are pulled taut, looped in practiced knots. A well-noted detail from frontier life is that parties often tethered livestock in lines or small clusters, arranging them like beads on a string for easier monitoring. Some families used hobbling straps, fastening them loosely around the animal's legs to limit sudden sprints. Others employed makeshift corrals, using fallen branches or brush. The methods varied widely depending on the terrain and the personality of the animals themselves. As you move along the tether line, you pause to tighten a rope that has slackened. The knot feels rough under your fingers. You pull it snug, anchoring it firmly. A faint metallic clink reaches your ears as the rope rubs against its iron ring. You step back and study the line. Everything appears steady. A man approaches, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He carries a lantern shielded with cloth to dim the light. He nods toward you, grateful that you checked the ropes. In a quiet voice, he tells you he once lost a mule in the middle of the night because the animal chewed through its tether and wandered miles away, drawn by the scent of wild grass. They found it at dawn standing proudly atop a small ridge, looking far too pleased with itself. He chuckles at the memory, though the inconvenience must have been maddening. He returns to his wagon, and his lantern glow fades. You move toward the horses next. They shift nervously, ears flicking at every subtle sound. Horses are always more alert than oxen, and their tension spreads through the night air like static. You stroke one down the neck, feeling its muscles tighten, then loosen beneath your hand. The animal exhales sharply. You whisper something soothing. Horses on the trail were sometimes prized above wagons themselves. They carried scouts, pulled lighter loads, and offered the mobility that saved lives. But they were also prime targets for thieves. Several travelers recorded stories of waking to hoofbeats disappearing into the night as stolen horses vanished before anyone could react. You crouch to inspect a pair of hobbled hooves. The straps appear in good condition, not too tight, not too loose. A few historians examining trail practices suggest that hobbling worked well most nights, but sometimes failed when clever or panicked animals wriggled free. The debate continues among enthusiasts who recreate trail journeys today, each claiming their favored method reigns superior. You smile at the thought. Some arguments never fade with time. You stand and listen. The livestock settle. Their breathing forms its own chorus, slow and steady. Then a sudden snort cuts through the quiet. A mule jerks its head up, ears pointed sharply toward the darkness. You freeze. The mule's tension spreads instantly to the surrounding animals. A few shift nervously. One stomps the ground. You hold your breath, scanning the prairie. For a moment, nothing moves. Then the sound comes. A faint rustle in the tall grass, too deep to be wind. Your heart taps faster. You squint, trying to separate shadow from shape. The rustle grows closer. The animals flick their tails, restless. Then, from the grass, emerges a deer. A small, delicate creature, with wide eyes reflecting lantern glow. It pauses, surprised by the sudden attention. You exhale at the same moment half the animals do. The deer blinks, dips its head, and bounds off into the night with graceful leaps. The tension dissolves instantly. You laugh softly under your breath. It is not the first time wildlife has startled an entire camp. Frontier letters mention that deer, pronghorns, and even wayward badgers frequently caused midnight commotions that sent tired settlers stumbling out of their blankets in confusion. You continue along the edge of the camp, checking on the last few animals. A pair of oxen lie down together, their massive bodies forming a warm mound against the chill. One flicks its ear lazily as you approach. They seem calm now, soothed by the consistency of the night wind. You kneel beside them briefly, feeling their body heat radiate outward like a natural hearth. Behind you, the wagon circle glows faintly with leftover firelight. People sleep in clusters, their silhouettes still and peaceful. You realize now that watching over livestock was just another layer of keeping the entire group safe. Protecting them meant protecting your mobility, your food, your ability to continue westward. They were not just beasts of burden, they were partners in survival. A soft nicker drifts through the air, then the gentle grind of teeth as a horse chews on hay. The night softens again. The prairie settles into its rhythm. You return to your bedding and lie down. The sounds of the animals remain steady, grounding, familiar. You pull your blanket up to your chin and let the night cradle you once more. The livestock continue their quiet chorus, and the knowledge that they are safe allows your eyelids to grow heavy. Sleep returns to you slowly, carried on the warm exhale of the animals you helped protect. You drift back from sleep once more as the night reaches its deepest blue. The camp has fallen completely into silence, except for the soft rustle of grass and the gentle breathing of animals. You sit up slowly, stretching your neck, and your gaze moves instinctively to the spot beside your bedding where your rifle rests. Even now, half awake, you feel its presence like an extension of your hand. Out here on the Oregon Trail, weapons were not symbols of bravado. They were quiet companions that settled alongside every traveler at night, not out of violence, but out of caution. You reach for the rifle, checking by touch rather than sight. The wood feels cool, the metal cold against your fingertips. You set it back down gently. In the dim moonlight, it looks almost peaceful. Many settlers wrote about tucking weapons within arm's reach before drifting to sleep. They did so instinctively, as though placing a protective boundary between themselves and the unknown. This habit became so ingrained that even travelers who rarely fired a shot kept their rifles beside their blankets as naturally as one might set a pair of slippers by the bed. A bit of trail wisdom passed between seasoned migrants said that a rifle poorly placed was more dangerous than one not carried at all. A misplaced firearm could be kicked, stepped on, or knocked loose by a startled sleeper. You test that thought now, nudging your rifle slightly closer so it lies parallel to your body. The weight of it offers a strange reassurance. You glance across the camp. Others have done the same. You see the faint silhouettes of rifles resting against wagon wheels, tucked under blankets, laid across saddles. Even those who preferred pistols kept them within fingertip distance. You watch a man nearby shift in his sleep, his hand brushing the butt of his pistol as naturally as if he were reaching for a familiar comfort. Not all weapons were brandished with confidence. One settler's recollection describes how her husband slept with his rifle, loaded but uncapped, terrified it might discharge if he rolled onto it. Another traveler admitted he kept his gun empty until sunrise because the idea of fumbling a loaded weapon in the dark frightened him more than any predator. People improvised their own rules, each believing their method was safest. You pick up your rifle again, polishing a small patch of dust from the stock. As you run your thumb along the metal, you recall something you once read. Some families argued each night about whether their weapons should stay loaded or remain empty until needed. Those in favor of loading them insisted that danger came too quickly to waste time prepping a gun. Others argued that fatigue and darkness made accidents more likely. Experts today continue to explore how common firearm mishaps were along the trail, though most agree they occurred more frequently than pioneers wanted to admit. You ease the rifle back onto the ground, aligning it carefully. Then you rise and take a quiet stroll around the wagon circle. As you pass the central fire pit, you notice a man seated near his sleeping children. He is awake, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound is rhythmic, scraping softly in the dark. You ask if everything is all right. He smiles wearily and explains that sharpening the blade keeps his nerves steady. He says he rarely needs it, but keeping it ready makes the night feel bearable. His honesty lingers with you as you move on. Near the eastern edge of camp, you spot a woman checking the powder horn tied at her waist. She opens the small wooden plug, shakes it lightly, then returns it to her belt. When she catches you watching, she shrugs and says she keeps the horn close because she once heard a noise so strange that she nearly convinced herself the prairie had swallowed someone. Rechecking her supplies helped her feel grounded. You nod, understanding the sentiment. People needed rituals out here. Rituals made the unpredictable feel manageable. You return to your bedding and sit on the blanket's edge, crossing your legs. The stars glitter quietly overhead, sharp and cold. The wagon circle creaks occasionally as cooling wood contracts. You reach out and adjust your rifle again, feeling its weight. For a moment, you imagine yourself centuries later in a warm room, laughing at how tenderly people once handled such weapons. But here, in this expanse of lonely nighttime prairie, caution feels like respect, not paranoia. The prairie wind picks up. It rustles your hair, ripples across your blanket, and whistles faintly through the wagon spokes. The sound carries with it the memory of a story shared earlier in the journey. A family woke one night to find their weapons missing, stolen by a thief who slipped through camp under cover of darkness. They retrieved them the next morning only because the thief dropped them while fleeing. Whether this tale is entirely true or embellished by frightened imagination is uncertain, but it stays with you as you lie back down. You rest one arm across your stomach and let your other hand hover near the rifle. You do not grip it, only maintain nearness. The presence of it anchors you. It draws a thin line between vulnerability and preparedness. It reminds you that the trail holds both danger and promise, and travelers slept between those two truths every single night. A soft noise pulls your attention outward, the faint clinking of metal. You turn your head and see a young guard adjusting his revolver as he prepares for his watch rotation. He handles it carefully, almost respectfully. As he passes your spot, he raises two fingers in a quiet greeting. You return the gesture. You feel yourself easing back into sleep, that slow slide where thoughts loosen and drift apart. You curl your blanket closer around your shoulders. Your breathing steadies. Your fingers rest near the rifle, not in fear, but in a habit born from the prairie's vast uncertainty. Here, under an endless sky, the settlers learned that peace and threat lived side by side. And so, like them, you keep your protection close, letting its familiar weight watch over you, while your mind finally gives in to the night. Your eyelids grow heavy, the camp drifts into stillness, and with your rifle resting quietly beside you, you slip into sleep's waiting arms. You wake to a shift in the air, a subtle tremor that threads itself through the canvas, whispers of night. The temperature has dropped, the wind has changed direction, and in the distance, something low and rumbling rolls across the plains, like a warning spoken in a language older than memory. You sit up slowly, rubbing your arms, and realize that tonight the settlers' greatest enemy is not an animal, nor a stranger, nor the vastness of the prairie. It is the weather. Storms on the Oregon Trail were unpredictable, dramatic, and occasionally terrifying. You look up at the sky and see clouds gathering like dark sails drifting across the moon. The stars dim behind them. The air tastes metallic, charged with the faint promise of lightning. You wrap your blanket tighter around your shoulders and scan the camp. Others are beginning to stir too, instinctively sensing the change. A woman hurries to pull a wagon flap tight. A man begins piling loose gear under a canvas sheet. Someone whispers anxiously that storms out here form faster than people expect. A detail often mentioned in pioneer letters describes how travelers could watch a clear sky fill with lightning in minutes, as though the heavens simply flipped from calm to chaos without warning. You hear that history echoed in the nervous shuffling of the camp now. You stand, dust brushing from your blanket, and step out into the wind. It pushes against your face with rising insistence. Dust swirls around your ankles. The campfire embers jitter, then scatter as a gust flattens them. You hurry to help shield the remaining coals, kicking dirt over them so they do not blow into the wagons. A man beside you mutters that he once knew a group that lost half its canvas to a wandering spark during a windstorm. Whether the tale is exaggerated or not, it sends a ripple of urgency through everyone. Lightning flashes far out on the horizon, illuminating the landscape in a brief, ghostly pulse. The prairie becomes a bright, frozen tableau for one heartbeat, then disappears back into darkness. The moment is eerie enough that your skin tightens at the back of your neck. Settlers often wrote that storms at night felt supernatural, as though the land itself was speaking with a rumble deep beneath the grass. Some researchers examining these accounts note that travelers interpreted weather not just as climate, but as omen. You bend to secure your bedding, now flapping angrily in the rising wind. You roll it quickly and tuck it beneath your wagon, weighing it with a stone. The wind moans through the spokes like a low, hollow whistle. It's a sound that makes you draw in your breath. For a moment, you imagine the settlers who faced storms without even the shelter of wagons, those who traveled early in the season or ended up stranded on ridges. The thought sends a small shiver through your spine. Your attention snaps to the livestock as a horse whinnies sharply. The animals sense the brewing energy long before humans do. You hurry toward them, helping others tighten the ropes, checking knots, soothing frightened creatures with slow strokes. Their bodies tremble, shifting anxiously as thunder rolls again. One ox bumps into another, making the whole line jostle. A boy runs forward, calling out to calm them. You can hear the strain in the animal's breathing, the small huffs of fear mixed with irritation. Wind tears at the wagon covers now. The fabric snaps like sails caught in a storm at sea. A sheet flaps loose, and you help a woman retie it, your fingers fumbling as lightning flashes again, closer this time. She thanks you breathlessly. Her hair whips across her face. You both duck instinctively, as the thunder answers a few seconds later, louder, nearer, like a giant exhaling. You follow her glance toward the horizon. The storm wall grows darker and wider, churning like a massive creature rolling over the earth. Storm systems on the plains often traveled with surprising speed. In some first-hand accounts, travelers wrote about storms leapfrogging across the horizon, sometimes overtaking camps before people even finished securing their belongings. Whether these descriptions are literal or simply the impressions of frightened observers remains something experts discuss, but the image is vivid in your mind. The first raindrop hits your cheek like a cold coin, then another, then a scattering. The storm does not ease into its arrival. It pounces. Rain attacks in slanting sheets, soaking cloth and skin instantly. You drag your blanket tighter and run toward your wagon, ducking as water slaps the dust into wet clay around your feet. Thunder roars above you now, so close it shakes the air in your lungs. You press your back against the wagon and breathe through the shock of cold. Wetness seeps through your clothes. Mud forms under your boots. The rope lines hum like taut strings vibrating in the wind. Animals grunt, shuffle, and brace themselves against the elements. A mother rushes her children deeper beneath the wagon belly, shielding them like a mother bird guarding her nest. You watch her gesture, protective and instinctual, and feel a flicker of admiration. Lightning explodes overhead again, turning the world white for a split second. You see the entire camp in that stark flash. People huddled, canvas whipping, animals trembling, wagons rocking slightly in the wind. When the darkness returns, it feels almost deeper than before. You blink away the afterimage burned into your vision. Trail diaries speak of nights exactly like this, where lightning became so bright that people could see the bones of their own hands held up against it. You glance at your fingers instinctively. You pull your blanket up and brace yourself as another gust hits. Water sprays across your face. Your mouth fills with the taste of wet dust. You feel grounded by the soil beneath you, despite the chaos above. You crouch low, one hand gripping your wagon wheel. The wood vibrates from the thunder. The storm reaches its crescendo. Rain hammers the wagons like fists. The smell of wet earth rises thick and raw. Lightning dances somewhere behind the clouds, lighting them from the inside. You hold your breath, and then, gradually, the fury begins to loosen. The thunder softens. The rain slows. The wind shifts from wild to weary. You lift your head slightly as the storm pulls itself away, drifting westward with murmuring reluctance. Droplets cling to your eyelashes. Your clothes are heavy with water, but the worst has passed. A lantern flickers on near the far wagon, another beside it. People begin emerging from their shelters like damp, exhausted survivors of some ancient rite. You step out from the wagon, stretching your stiff legs. The camp glistens in the faint moonlight that has now returned, shining on puddles and slick wagon sides like scattered mirrors. A man pats the neck of his trembling horse, whispering reassurance. A woman checks her children, kissing their foreheads. Someone nearby mutters that storms like this could rip the soul straight out of a person. You smile tiredly. The sentiment feels accurate. Somewhere deeper in camp, two travelers argue lightly about whether tonight's storm was the worst they had seen, or barely a taste of what lies further west. Their disagreement echoes those found in many old travel accounts, which varied wildly in how people remembered storms. Some described them as signs of divine testing. Others insisted storms were just weather, nothing more. Now, with the world settling again, you return to your bedding. It is damp, but salvageable. You shake out the water and lay it back down. Your muscles ache, but your breath steadies. The storm's passing leaves behind a sense of fragile peace, as though the prairie has acknowledged your presence and decided, for now, to let you stay. You lie down, feeling the coolness of the wet earth beneath you. The storm's thunder still hums at the edges of your mind, fading slowly, like a lullaby played on distant drums. You pull your blanket around you, close your eyes, and let exhaustion cradle you. After all, even storms cannot last forever. Sleep returns, soft and heavy, settling over you like the calm after lightning. You wake to the scent of damp earth still lingering in the air from last night's storm. The clouds have drifted on, leaving a sky washed clean and pale with early moonlight. The camp feels different now, calmer, as though the land itself has taken a long breath after its outburst. You push yourself upright and stretch, noticing that people are moving quietly along the edge of the wagon circle. Tonight you will be camping near a river, and already you can hear the low murmur of flowing water threading itself through the night. Rivers were both lifeline and gamble for settlers heading west. You rise, drawn by the sound, and step beyond the wagons. Grass brushes your legs, still wet from the storm. The ground dips slightly, and soon the shimmer of the river appears before you, silver and soft beneath the moon. It's wider than you expected, its current steady but not violent. You feel its cool breath on your skin before you even crouch beside it. Water was necessary for drinking, cooking, washing, and keeping livestock alive. Travelers frequently aimed to stop their wagons near rivers or creeks whenever possible. One account from a Kansas crossing describes families walking half a mile in the dark to fill barrels after a dry day. Being near water tonight feels like a small gift. But riverbanks carried their own hazards, something settlers learned quickly and sometimes painfully. You dip your fingers into the water. It's cold enough to make you shiver. The current tugs gently, promising more strength than it appears to have. A faint splash farther downstream draws your attention, but when you look, the only thing moving is a drifting branch. A few pioneers once noted that quiet splashes could signal fish or small animals, but they also warned that larger creatures sometimes roamed the banks at night. Whether these warnings came from true encounters or anxious imaginations remains a point of discussion among those who study frontier folklore. You straighten and scan the area. The wagons have been positioned slightly farther back from the river's edge, creating a buffer zone of open ground. You walk through it, feeling the soil under your boots. It's softer than last night, soaked in places, and gives a little with each step. You understand instantly why teams avoided placing wagons too close to rivers. Wet earth could swallow wheels, twisting them, snapping spokes, or tipping entire loads into mud. Even in the gentlest breeze, riverbank soil shifted differently, carrying hints of erosion. As you return toward camp, you notice several travelers digging small trenches around their bedding. A man explains that these shallow grooves help guide any unexpected rain runoff away from sleeping areas. He gestures to the river and says that out here water appears without warning. His statement echoes dozens of journals where settlers described sudden nighttime rises in water levels. A small creek could swell rapidly after distant rainfall, surprising anyone camped too near. Modern researchers note that these flash rises were especially common in narrow ravines and sloped bank regions, though many travelers lacked the local knowledge to predict them. You wander closer to the main camp again. Someone has tied a rope between two wagons and hung damp clothes on it. They sway slightly in the breeze, dripping quietly onto the soil. A woman beside you wrings out a blanket, then sighs with exhaustion. She tells you that sleeping near a river always made her uneasy because her grandmother once spoke of a flash flood sweeping through a distant settlement. Whether the story was fact or embroidered by generations of retelling is unclear, but the fear it carried feels entirely real. You step away to help another traveler haul a water bucket to his wagon. The handle digs into your hands, heavy and cold. He laughs lightly and tells you water always weighs more at night, especially after a storm. You grin, appreciating the small humor. Once the bucket is secured, he glances toward the river with narrowed eyes. He says he never sleeps deeply on river nights, always listening for sudden changes. His instinct, shaped by experience, reminds you how people on the trail came to sense subtleties in nature that modern travelers easily overlook. You move back toward the water once more. The river's song is hypnotic, almost lullaby-like. You kneel at the edge, trailing your fingertips along the surface. Tiny ripples form around your hand and drift outward. The river seems peaceful, but its depth remains a mystery. Many pioneers wrote that stepping blindly into western rivers was a fool's risk. Currents changed beneath the surface in ways that looked harmless from the bank. Some animals, especially bison, crossed at night and churned up sediment, making the water unpredictable. The idea that herds sometimes passed silently in darkness fascinates scholars today, though the exact frequency of such crossings is debated. You sit on a rock near the water and listen. Frogs croak lazily along the muddy edges, their throaty calls echoing between reeds. A pair of crickets answer from the grass behind you. A soft splash somewhere upstream suggests movement, and your body tenses for a heartbeat before realizing it's likely a beaver or muskrat cutting through the current. You ease back into your seat. Moist night air wraps around you like a cool shawl. The smell of river water is unmistakable, part earth, part stone, part something faintly metallic. You breathe it in deeply, appreciating the contrast to the dust-filled days. For many settlers, camping near water offered psychological relief. Water hinted at possibility, renewal, and morning comfort. Some diaries even mention people soaking their sore feet before bed, letting the river mend what the trail strained. You rise again and step up onto the slight embankment. From here, the camp looks like a cluster of small stars cast across the earth. The fires burn low, reflecting off puddled ground. People settle into blankets, grateful for the nearness of water and wary of it all at once. Even the livestock seem quieter tonight, drinking deeply before resting. As you return to your bedding, you notice a young couple debating whether to move their blankets a few feet farther from the river. The woman insists she heard the water rise slightly. The man says it's only the wind. Their disagreement mirrors countless campfire discussions recorded in trail memoirs. Some people trusted the land implicitly. Others trusted nothing but caution. Both approaches carried wisdom. You finally reach your own sleeping place and crouch down. The ground is damp but firm. You adjust your blanket so the edge stays away from a small puddle nearby. Then you sit for a moment, letting the sound of the river find its way into your breathing. It becomes a rhythm, steady and soothing. A horse snorts from behind you, then settles. A dog pads quietly through the camp, sniffing the air. A few voices murmur in the distance, wrapping up last-minute tasks. And through it all, the river hums. You lie down slowly. The coolness of the night drifts across your skin. You close your eyes and let the moving water gather your thoughts, smoothing the rough edges of the day. The river speaks in steady lines, telling you you're safe enough, sheltered enough, visited but not threatened, and with its gentle music filling the dark, you fall into sleep as though carried downstream on a slow, drifting current. You ease awake again, just as the wind shifts, carrying with it the dry whisper of prairie grass, brushing against itself. Tonight the camp has stopped in a place where the grass grows tall, nearly up to your waist when you walk through it. In daylight it looks golden and soft, swaying in long waves like an inland ocean, but at night that same grass becomes something else entirely. You sit up slowly, feeling the stems rustle around your blanket, and it strikes you just how vulnerable the settlers must have felt, bedding down inside this living maze. Tall prairie grass can hide anything. That truth presses gently but persistently against your thoughts as you stretch your legs. You lift a handful of the grass, letting its dry blades slip between your fingers. They make a faint rattling sound, brittle but musical. Earlier in the day, the children ran through it laughing. Now the same grass bends and curls in the dark, turning playful daylight scenes into places where shadows mingle with possibility. Travelers often wrote about their unease when forced to camp in tall grass. Some described the sensation as sleeping inside a doorway to the unknown. Others joked that the grass whispered warnings at night. One recorded observation describes a man who refused to sleep lying down on such nights because he claimed creatures moved more easily when humans were at rest. Whether his claim was based on real experience or a sleepless imagination remains uncertain, but the memory of it lingers with you now, as the grass shifts just beyond your feet. You rise and walk a few paces from your bedding. Every step makes a soft swish as the stalks part around your legs. You glance over your shoulder to ensure you can still see the faint glow of the wagon circle. The grass muffles sound, turning the world strangely small, as if the night presses closer here than in open prairie. You crouch and part the grass gently with your hands. The stems tickle your fingers before snapping softly back into place. In some accounts, settlers explained how tall grass could conceal small predators or wandering cattle. They spoke of hearing rustles during the night and imagining wolves or prowlers, only to discover in the morning that a stray calf had wandered past their blankets. Modern readers may smile at that, but the fear in those moments was real. A sudden ripple in the grass pulls your attention sharply to the right. You freeze, ears pricking. For a few seconds, everything goes still. Then the grass sways again, slower this time, almost lazy. A rabbit darts out and bolts away in zigzag leaps. You exhale, your heartbeat settling. You laugh quietly at yourself, realizing how easy it is to let the darkness amplify every small disturbance. You stand again and head toward where a few travelers are gathering near a low fire. Their silhouettes flicker as the flames breathe. The fire here is smaller than usual, kept low on purpose. One woman explains that tall grass creates a risk of fire spreading, so flames must be tamed and watched carefully. This aligns with accounts where settlers painstakingly cleared a ring of bare earth around fires when camping in dense vegetation. No one wanted a stray spark igniting a prairie blaze that could sweep across miles. A man crouches near the fire, poking at the embers. He tells you he once saw a grass fire move so quickly that it outran horses. Whether this is literal or simply the exaggeration of a long-traveled storyteller is hard to say, but you believe him enough to stay mindful of where your own blanket lies. The idea of wind whipping flames through this dry grass sends a chill along your arms. You wander back toward camp's edge, where a few people are checking the perimeter. They rustle the grass with sticks, making sure no animals have nested too close. A boy trails behind them, carrying a small tin connected to a rope. When you ask about it, he grins and lifts it proudly. He says the sound startles anything hiding in the grass. The technique appears in a few lesser-known trail recollections, where people improvised noise-making tools to alert them of unexpected movement. Whether the method worked consistently is unclear, but the novelty of it charms you. The wind sighs again, brushing long strands of grass toward you. The movement creates a sea-like shimmer in the moonlight, rolling and falling in waves. The sound is soothing and uneasy at the same time. It reminds you that the prairie is alive even when the world sleeps. A woman nearby clears a small area around her bedding, flattening the grass with the back of a shovel. She tells you her father always said that flattened grass around a sleeping space lets you hear anything stepping toward you. You nod, considering the logic. Many families pass down similar tricks, often shaped by personal experience rather than shared culture. These bits of wisdom formed a patchwork of survival knowledge. You kneel beside your own bedding and mimic her actions, pressing the grass down with your hands. The stalks bend quietly under your palms, releasing a faint, earthy smell. The flattened circle feels like a small island in the middle of swaying seas. You lie back to test it. The edges rustle faintly as the wind moves through them. The sound becomes rhythmic, almost hypnotic. A distant rustle grows louder for a moment, and you sit up again. Your eyes scan the dark shapes of the grass. The movement stops, then resumes farther away. You squint, trying to identify any shape. When the wind shifts, you finally see it. A small group of pronghorn grazing slowly, their bodies drifting like shadows through the grass. You let out a soft breath. Their presence so close is oddly comforting, a reminder that not all movement is a threat. Some travelers noted that the presence of grazing animals indicated a relatively safe night, since predators tended to avoid areas where large prey felt relaxed enough to feed. Whether this pattern was universally true remains debated, but it feels reassuring tonight. You lie back down, settling into the flattened space you prepared. The grass around you rustles gently, and the night sounds weave together in a tapestry of soft notes. Crickets chirp, the wind hums, the wagons creak faintly as cooling wood contracts. Everything blends into a peaceful, almost meditative rhythm. Your eyes grow heavy, but before sleep fully takes you, your mind lingers on how settlers balanced fear and familiarity in places like this. Tall grass hid danger, yes, but it also cushioned their steps, provided bedding material, and glowed beautifully in sunlight. It was both enemy and companion, shaping their nights and their memories. You draw your blanket up, inhale the cool scent of grass, and let the prairie's quiet breath lull you into drifting calm. The grass sways one last time, like a soft hand brushing your cheek. Then the night gathers you in fully. You wake again to a different kind of night, one that feels fuller, richer, alive in ways you did not notice before. The prairie air carries a soft vibration, a hum beneath your breathing, and you realize the land has shifted into its nighttime rhythm. Tonight, you are not just sleeping under the sky. You are sharing the darkness with an entire constellation of living creatures that shape the Oregon Trail long after the sun disappears. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes as the sounds sharpen. Your first awareness is the low, rhythmic drone of insects. They form a kind of distant orchestra, each tiny voice adding a thread to the wider tapestry. Crickets chirp in harmonized patterns. Grasshoppers click and rasp as they leap through the shadows. Somewhere closer, a cicada rattles, its voice rising and falling like a slow breath. The settlers before you described these noises as both soothing and irritating, depending on how tired they were. For some, the sound meant company. For others, it meant the night would offer little rest. You shift your blanket aside and step a few feet from your bedding, letting the night wrap itself around you. A warm current of air carries the smell of wild sage and something sweet you can't quite name, perhaps blooming prairie flowers, lingering even this late. Some diaries from the journey mention travelers stopping mid-walk just to breathe in the unexpected perfume of night-blooming plants. The prairie never stopped surprising them. You look toward the darker edges of camp and notice faint shapes moving. At first you think they're shadows, then you see the slow, deliberate movement that betrays animal life. A small herd of bison grazes just beyond the firelight, their heavy silhouettes outlined in moon silver. They move with surprising quiet for creatures so massive. Their presence feels ancient, like watching the earth itself shift positions. You stay very still, barely even breathing. Bison were both blessing and danger for people on the trail. They represented potential food and materials, yet a startled herd could trample camps or scatter livestock with terrifying speed. One traveler once wrote that the ground trembled when a herd ran, as though the world itself were rolling toward us. Some modern researchers believe these accounts may exaggerate the trembling, though many agree that hundreds of hooves hitting packed soil could indeed shake the earth underfoot. Tonight, though, the bison are peaceful, grazing with slow, patient movements. Closer to camp, you spot tiny flashes of light blinking across the grass. Fireflies, dozens of them. They rise and fall like floating embers, drifting lazily between blades of grass. Their glow is soft, warm, rhythmic. They seem to breathe with the land. You crouch low, watching one hover near your hand. For a moment, time dissolves. You think of settlers whispering to their children about night stars that learn to fly, a phrase you once read in a woman's journal from 1852. It echoes here, glowing faintly in your memory. Then a coyote howl rises from somewhere in the distance, long and wavering. It sends a ripple through the camp. You straighten, listening. The howl is eerie but not menacing. It's a voice staking a claim to this shared darkness. After a pause, another howl answers, then a third. The calls overlap like a chorus of mournful flutes. Several pioneers wrote about lying awake with coyotes singing their nighttime ballads, unsure whether to feel fear, awe, or pity. Some believed the animals called to each other out of loneliness. Whether that belief holds any scientific merit is unclear, but you understand why they felt it. The bison lift their heads briefly at the sound, then resume grazing. The fireflies drift on. You turn slightly as a soft splash comes from the riverbank, probably a beaver or muskrat slipping into the water. You walk a few steps that direction and stop at the shimmer of moonlit ripples. The water reflects the stars like scattered needles of white light. You hear a new sound now, something soft, rustling near your feet. You look down to find a small procession of beetles marching purposefully through the grass. You grin. Even the smallest creatures seem to have places to go tonight. Accounts from travelers occasionally describe beetles invading bedding, nibbling crumbs or crawling across sleeping faces. Some families placed shoes upside down to keep out insects. Others shook blankets meticulously before lying down. These stories remind you how close humans live to nature on the trail, with very few boundaries between themselves and the earth. You stretch your arms and look toward the far side of camp. One person is awake, tending to a faint ember glow. Perhaps they couldn't sleep. Perhaps they volunteered to keep an eye on the animals. You begin to walk toward them but pause midway as another sound rises behind you. It's a deep, rhythmic grunt, steady and powerful. You turn quickly, thinking for a moment it might be something dangerous. But no, it's only a mule snoring. You bite back a laugh. Snoring livestock appear in several light-hearted accounts from the trail, where travelers joked that animals slept louder than people. One woman wrote that her family's mule snored with the determination of a full-grown man who had earned the right. It's a charming detail you carry with you as you watch the mule twitch in its sleep, kicking at non-existent flies. A wind gust passes through, warm and thick with the smell of grass. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. The night has become an organism of its own, full of breath and pulse and movement. Out here, darkness does not silence life. It awakens it. As you walk back toward your bedding, the prairie music grows smoother. The insects keep their rhythm. The bison move away, their shadows fading. Coyotes call softer now, as though easing into rest. Even the fireflies seem to drift slower, glowing lazily above the earth. You lie down again, pulling your blanket close. The ground is cool but comforting. You nestle into your bedding and let the night settle over you like a warm shawl. The sounds blend into a single whispering harmony that grows lighter, gentler, as your heartbeat slows. Your eyes flutter. The prairie shifts once more, this time to cradle you. And with the wildlife around you singing its soft nocturnal lullaby, you glide into sleep, woven into the living tapestry of the night. You stir from sleep to the uneasy sound of someone coughing nearby, a harsh, rasping cough that cuts through the soft nighttime hum. It is not loud, but it has weight to it, the kind that makes everyone within earshot subconsciously turn their head. Illness on the Oregon Trail was never trivial. You sit up slowly, pulling your blanket around your shoulders as your eyes adjust to the dim glow of a rekindled ember bed. Shadows sway across canvas and grass. A small cluster of travelers gathers near one of the wagons. You rise and walk toward them quietly, your feet brushing through the cool, flattened grass. A woman kneels beside a sick companion, her hand pressed to his forehead. From where you stand, you can see the sheen of sweat on his skin, even in the faint firelight. His breathing is shallow, uneven, filled with the soft rattle of exhaustion. Sickness changed everything about how a camp settled at night. People who might normally spread out kept closer. Tasks were rearranged. Caution rose like a tide. One pioneer memoir notes that when someone fell ill, the entire wagon line felt the shift, as though a taut rope had been plucked. That truth rings through the camp now. You can sense the heightened awareness, the slight tension, the way people move with quieter urgency. You crouch beside the group, offering space but ready to help. The woman tending the sick man dips a cloth into a small basin of cool water. She wrings it gently, then presses it against his forehead. The gesture is slow, steady, familiar. Many settlers carried only the simplest remedies: cool cloths, herbal teas, and whatever supplies they could barter for along the way. Medicines were precious, and actual cures were rare. Most treatments relied on comfort and hope. The man coughs again, shoulders tightening with the force of it. You wince slightly. A well-preserved detail from trail journals describes how coughs at night often echoed more sharply than during the day. Something about the open darkness magnified every sound, reminding travelers how fragile the human body could be when placed in a land so indifferent. A young boy approaches, carrying a wooden cup of water. His hands shake slightly as he offers it to the woman. She smiles softly, takes it, and helps the sick man sip slowly. You notice the boy's eyes flick toward the shadows beyond the wagons, as though illness might invite danger from outside as well. Fear on the trails often came in layered forms, wrapping itself around both the physical and the imagined. You shift your weight and sit down properly in the grass, folding your legs beneath you. The earth feels cool and damp against your palms. A man beside you murmurs that the patient fell ill earlier in the day after drinking from a muddy stream. Whether that is true or a guess, you cannot tell. Clean water was a constant concern, and contamination took many travelers by surprise. Some letters from the period describe entire families dizzy with fever after trusting a seemingly harmless creek. As you listen, another woman squats beside the sick man, holding a pouch of dried herbs. She crushes a small handful between her palms, releasing a bitter scent into the air. She explains that a tea made from these leaves might ease his breathing. You nod, thinking of how herbal knowledge traveled westward through families, borrowed from native traditions, or passed along by those who had learned from necessity. Researchers today continue to study how much of that knowledge was accurate, and how much was shaped by trial, error, and the desperate desire to help. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of wet soil and the faint tang of sickness. You wrap your blanket a little tighter. A few more travelers emerge from their bedding, drawn by the sound of the cough. They keep respectful distance, but watch with concern. Illness threatened everyone, especially in close quarters. Even a minor fever could slow a wagon line, or force a family to stay behind until the patient improved. A young mother holding her infant steps closer and asks if she can help. She looks anxious, her gaze flicking between the patient and her child. Another woman gently encourages her to keep back just enough to avoid unnecessary exposure. You see the mother hesitate, then step away reluctantly, cradling her baby closer. That balance between compassion and caution must have been one of the hardest parts of trail life. You turn your attention back to the sick man. He groans softly, shifting his weight. His skin glistens in the emberlight. The woman tending him wipes his forehead again, murmuring soft encouragement. Her voice is low, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. For a moment, you see how care itself became a nightly ritual on the trail, one that required patience more than skill. Someone hands you a small kettle to hold while they pour warm water into it. The steam rises, carrying the sharp scent of brewed herbs. The mixture darkens gradually, forming a rough tea meant more for relief than cure. You pass it carefully to the caretaker, who helps the patient drink. He grimaces at the taste, but a few sips do seem to ease his breathing. You glance upward, noticing how the clouds drift across the moon. The light softens and brightens in intervals, It gives the night a shifting, uncertain rhythm that mirrors the worry settling across the camp. One traveler mutters that this illness reminds him of a fever that once swept through another wagon train ahead of them. Whether he is recalling fact or feeding fear remains unclear. People often blended memory with rumor when speaking about sickness on the trail. A dog pads into your circle now, sniffing cautiously at the air. You gently wave it back. Animals sensed distress and often came to investigate. Some settlers believed dogs could detect fevers through smell alone. While this idea lacks firm evidence, it is one of those small frontier beliefs that still sparks curiosity among historians and enthusiasts today. As the minutes pass, the patient settles into a shallow but steadier rhythm of breathing. His cough becomes less violent. The caretaker releases a slow breath of relief. You sense the camp collectively relaxing, though no one fully lets their guard down. In this environment, a single night's illness could become tomorrow's crisis. You rise briefly to fetch more water for the basin. The river nearby reflects the moon in trembling streaks of light. The water feels icy on your hands as you fill the wooden bowl. When you return, the caretaker thanks you softly and continues tending to the patient. You kneel once more, watching the scene quietly. It becomes clear that nighttime care on the trail was more than tending symptoms. It was a moment where the community tightened, forming a protective ring around someone vulnerable. Travelers depended on one another's strength, but also on their compassion. Gradually, the patient drifts into a fragile sleep. His chest rises and falls more evenly. The caretaker gently adjusts the blanket around him and brushes damp hair from his forehead. Her hands move with exhaustion but also resilience. You feel the profound weight of what it meant to care for someone under the open sky, miles from any doctor, relying only on warmth, water, herbs, and human presence. The camp grows quiet again. Conversations soften. People return slowly to their bedding. The night resumes its steady rhythm, as though the land has acknowledged the struggle and decided to give the travelers a moment of rest. You settle back into your own blankets, breathing deeply. The smell of herbs still lingers in the air. The distant flow of the river whispers its constant music. A few crickets resume their song. Your eyes grow heavy. You let the night close around you once more, carrying with it the fragile promise that the dawn will come, and with it, a chance for healing. Sleep finds you gently, wrapping itself around the worry that still flickers at the edge of your thoughts. You are drifting in that soft space between waking and dreaming when a sudden shuffle breaks the night's rhythm. Not loud, just wrong, a sound out of place. You open your eyes slowly, letting them adjust to the dim wash of moonlight. The camp lies still, but you sense movement at the far edge of the wagon circle. Not from an animal this time, not from wind or settling canvas, something else. You sit up, blanket slipping to your lap. Shadows ripple across the tall grass and low fire glow. A figure stands just outside the circle, not quite hidden, not quite revealed. Your pulse quickens before you remind yourself that night visitors on the Oregon Trail were not always threats. Sometimes they were traders, lost travelers, scouts, or curious wanderers drawn by firelight. That reminder steadies you, a little. You rise quietly and step toward the center of camp, where a couple of others have noticed the silhouette as well. A lantern flickers to life, held low, its glow trembling across the grass. The figure steps closer. You tense reflexively, feeling every muscle brace, until the stranger lifts both hands in a slow, open gesture. You exhale, a respectful greeting, universal in meaning, even in vast open country. As the stranger enters the soft halo of lantern light, you notice his clothing, worn, patched, dust-covered. An older man, perhaps, carrying a bedroll across his shoulder and a small wooden staff. His eyes look tired rather than threatening. He speaks in a voice made quiet by distance and cold, explaining he is separated from his traveling party. The words come slowly, shaped by exhaustion. You can feel the camp's tension loosening with each sentence. One well-documented practice among westbound migrants was offering temporary shelter to lone travelers, especially at night. Such hospitality balanced compassion with caution. People helped one another because the trail itself was harsh enough, without adding loneliness to its burdens. You watch now as a few settlers gesture for the stranger to step closer to the fire, inviting him to warm his hands. Still, caution never disappeared entirely. A man discreetly positions himself near a wagon wheel, close enough to intervene if needed. A woman holds her child nearer, not out of fear but prudence. These small protective gestures reflect the unspoken rule of the road. Help those who need it, but remain alert. You study the stranger a moment longer. His shoulders sag in clear relief as he nears the fire and stretches his palms toward the heat. His breath fogs in the cool night. He asks for water first, then a moment to rest before continuing west in daylight. You hand him a cup without hesitation. His fingers tremble as he takes it. While he drinks, one of the older travelers questions him gently about where he came from and what happened to his party. His story is simple. His wagon wheel broke, he lagged behind, and by the time he repaired it, darkness had already fallen. Then the storm struck. He wandered in circles until he spotted the faint glow of your campfires. As he speaks, you notice how the group listens intently, weighing tone and detail. This kind of quiet evaluation was common on the trail. People had to judge character quickly, not harshly, but realistically. In some journals, pioneers mention entire evenings spent deciding whether a night visitor's story made sense before allowing them to stay near the wagons. While the stranger finishes his drink, an older woman prepares a small bundle of bread and dried meat for him. She does so calmly, as though feeding a newcomer is as natural as warming her hands by the fire. Her kindness draws a faint smile from the man, one filled with gratitude more than joy. A curious detail preserved in a few accounts is that nighttime visitors sometimes carried news from farther up the trail. This man is no exception. After catching his breath, he tells you about a fallen tree blocking the path 2 days west, and a river crossing that has become muddier than usual. He adds that another wagon train is traveling several miles ahead, slowed by illness. His voice dips when he shares that last part, as though sorrow itself traveled with the message. You watch the faces around you shift. Information like this helped parties prepare for hazards long before they encountered them. The idea that the night can deliver warnings or guidance feels fitting, almost poetic. Then the stranger grows quiet. He presses a hand to his temple briefly, showing signs of fatigue. You gesture toward a spot near the fire where he can rest. At first he hesitates, apologizing for imposing, but a nearby settler shakes his head and tells him plainly that no one should sleep alone on a night like this. The stranger's expression softens. The wind rustles the grass again, and you glance outward instinctively. Something about this moment reminds you of accounts where travelers misjudged visitors out of fear. Some stories described how people believed any unknown figure at night carried ill intent, when often the truth was far simpler. People were lost, cold, or desperate for companionship in an enormous landscape. Modern scholars examining these narratives point out how fear and misconception shaped trail interactions just as much as geography and weather. The stranger lies down with his bedroll near the fire, stretching out slowly as though every bone is weary. After a few minutes, his breathing evens into a shallow but steady rhythm. Someone drapes a spare blanket over him. Another checks the livestock again, just in case the disturbance unsettled them. The camp relaxes. You walk back to your bedding, feeling the cool earth beneath your feet. The lanterns are dimmed one by one, leaving only the faint glow of embers to light the camp. You lie down again and adjust your blanket, listening to the soft settling sounds of the group. Nearby, a couple whispers about the visitor, wondering aloud if his companions will find him tomorrow. You think of all the wanderers who crossed this land over the decades, leaving behind stories lost to time, remembered only in fragments. The trail was full of paths crossing and parting again, like rivers that meet briefly before flowing onward. You close your eyes and breathe deeply. The night visitor sleeps peacefully now. The camp has accepted him for the moment, as the trail often required humans to accept each other. The prairie exhales around you. The grass stirs. The stars shimmer. And as you sink slowly back into sleep, you feel the weight of shared humanity settle gently over the camp, binding strangers and companions together beneath the endless western sky. You drift in and out of shallow sleep until a soft debate rises near the center of camp, not heated, but insistent enough to tug you fully awake. You rub your eyes and push your blanket aside. The embers of the main fire glow like tiny suns scattered across dark soil. A few figures stand around it, arms folded, heads tilted toward one another. Even before you get close enough to hear their words, you already know tonight's topic, whether the campfires should be left burning low or extinguished completely. This discussion happened in almost every wagon train, almost every night. Fire was friend and foe at the same time, a source of warmth and comfort, but also a beacon that could draw unwanted attention. You step closer, your footsteps soft in the cool grass, and join the small circle of half-awake settlers weighing tonight's choice as though it were a matter of strategy, superstition, and personal comfort all braided together. A man gestures toward the dark prairie and insists the fires should be doused. He argues that keeping them glowing is like shouting into the night, announcing the camp's presence to anyone or anything wandering nearby. He recalls a night years ago when his previous party camped with bright fires, only to find tracks around their perimeter the next morning. He doesn't know what made them, but the memory still pricks at his nerves. You listen, imagining the unease of waking to footprints you didn't recognize. Across from him, a woman shakes her head. She says dimming the fires makes her feel exposed. She prefers a soft glow that lets her see the outlines of the wagons and the ground around her. She mentions that firelight keeps insects at bay, warms the sick, and soothes restless children. She lowers her voice when she adds that the dark makes her feel too alone. Night on the plains was a vast and heavy thing, and for many, a little fire softened its edges. You watch the shifting expressions around the circle. These are not just opinions. These are survival instincts rubbing against one another. You crouch near the embers and run your fingers through the dirt beside them. The earth is still warm, pulsing faintly with the memory of flame. Travelers often recorded debates like this in their journals, noting how choosing fire level became an unspoken vote on how safe the group felt. Some nights the fires burned tall and confident. Other nights they hid beneath blankets of ash. One older man clears his throat. His voice carries the tired patience of someone who has crossed much of the frontier already. He says that firelight does attract some attention, yes, but it also reveals movement. He prefers to see silhouettes approaching rather than rely solely on sound. His reasoning aligns with accounts where settlers claimed dim flames gave enough visibility to spot animals or people before they reached the circle. Yet even he hesitates to push for bright flames. The memory of prairies catching fire from stray sparks haunts anyone who has seen it happen. You glance toward the tall grass surrounding the camp, dry, still recovering from last night's storm, but dry enough that a wayward ember might cause trouble. You feel both arguments tugging at your mind. Someone kneels beside the embers and sprinkles a handful of sand over the brightest part of the fire. The glow dims to a soft orange. Another quietly objects, saying that if the fires go too low, morning kindling becomes harder to ignite. Fire was precious, especially in cold or wet conditions. Rebuilding it from scratch cost both time and strength. A few settlers kept coals alive overnight by burying them under a layer of ash, creating a smouldering pocket that lasted until dawn. In some diaries, this method appears as a treasured trick learned from seasoned travelers or from native neighbors familiar with the land. A woman sitting nearby suggests a compromise. Let the fires burn low but not die completely. A faint glow, enough for warmth and visibility, but not bright enough to draw distant eyes. Her voice is steady, soothing. As she speaks, you notice the tension ease slightly in the circle. You shuffle a little closer to the fire and feel its warmth touch your knees. You remember reading one account where a family insisted that embers kept evil spirits away. Whether symbolic or literal, the belief reveals how deeply fire intertwined with emotion, tradition, and fear. Even now, leaning over the low glow, you understand why some settlers clung to that comfort in the dark. A breeze moves through the camp, teasing the embers into brief brightness. You shield your eyes. When the wind quiets again, the glow softens. The group falls silent for a moment. People glance around, weighing their comfort against their caution. The decision must be made collectively, not by any single hand. A younger traveler speaks next. His voice is unsure yet thoughtful. He explains that his mother always said a small fire is a sign of peace, a way of telling the land you pass through that you mean no harm. You find the idea unexpectedly beautiful. The prairie, after all, is not just geography. It is presence, and presence sometimes demands gentleness. Still, another traveler answers with an opposing view. A dim fire may comfort the living, but it hides dangers. He reminds everyone how shadows can play tricks, how a moving figure becomes harder to distinguish without steady light. He says he once heard rustling behind his wagon and could not tell whether it was a cow, a man, or the wind. Only the faint glow of a dying ember revealed a fox sniffing at a scrap of food. You shift your blanket and glance toward your own wagon, imagining such a moment. Fear, imagination, instinct, they mingle freely in the dark. You sense that the debate is nearing its resolution. People's voices soften, shoulders relax. The woman who proposed the compromise clears more space around one fire and begins gently spreading the embers into a broad, shallow circle. This lowers the flame without extinguishing its heart. A man joins her, using a stick to nudge glowing pieces apart. Others begin doing the same with the smaller campfires. Soon, the camp transforms. Bright flames fade into soft glimmers. A warm, low light spreads through the wagon circle like glowing breath. The shadows thicken around the edges of the camp, but the inner ring remains visible enough to feel grounded. You take your place beside one of the newly banked fires and watch its faint dance. The orange glow pulses gently, steadying itself. It reminds you of a heartbeat, quiet, dependable, alive beneath the surface. The camp slowly returns to stillness. People drift back to their blankets. A few whisper final thoughts about the compromise. You lie down again, pulling your bedding around you, and let your gaze soften. Above you, the stars look sharper now that the fires are lower. The sky feels wider, deeper. You inhale the faint scent of cooling ash and night air. It is peaceful, yet alert. With the fires banked low, the prairie seems to listen more closely. But for now, you feel safe enough. The glow is gentle, the night is calm, and the decision made together feels balanced, wise, human. Your eyes close. The last thing you see is the faint ember light, warm and steady, guiding you into sleep. You wake again to a faint metallic rattle, soft but sharp enough to stir your senses. At first you think it might be a kettle lid settling or a stray buckle bumping against wood, but then you recognize the deliberate rhythm in the sound. Someone is testing the camp's improvised alarm line. You sit up, rubbing sleep from your eyes. The low fires glow gently, casting warm halos on the wagons, and the night feels heavier than before, as if the prairie is holding its breath. You stand slowly, blanket still wrapped around your shoulders, and walk toward the soft clinks echoing near the camp perimeter. A man crouches beside a rope stretched between two wagon wheels. Tin cups dangle from it at uneven intervals, shimmering faintly in the emberlight. He plucks one cup with a fingertip. It trembles, clinks, and sways. You know instantly what he's doing. Many wagon parties created makeshift alarm systems to warn sleepers when something approached the camp. These devices were simple, improvised from whatever materials people carried. Tin cups, small bells, metal spoons, bits of chain, even dried gourds filled with seeds. Their purpose wasn't to frighten intruders away. It was simply to wake someone, anyone, before danger crept too close. You kneel beside the man and ask if he needs help. He hands you a cup without a word, and you tie it halfway down the rope. The cup hangs loosely, swaying slightly in the night breeze. You tug the rope to test it. The entire line shivers with faint noise, barely loud enough to disturb the sleeping camp, but certainly enough to alert a light sleeper or a guard on watch. In one of the more unusual accounts of frontier life, a traveler described stringing small rocks inside strips of cloth and tying them along wagon spokes. When an animal brushed past, the stones clicked together softly. You've never tried this method, but the principle is the same. Create just enough sound to break the silence without causing panic. People along the Oregon Trail learned quickly that even small warnings could make the difference between peace and trouble. You move down the rope a little farther, checking spacing between cups. A woman approaches carrying a few spare spoons tied to thin leather strips. She adds them to the line, explaining that the last time her party crossed this region, a wandering mule spooked their horses in the middle of the night. They never heard it approach. Tonight, she wants no surprises. The memory in her eyes is still sharp, but steady now. As the two of you work, a boy peers out from behind a wagon, watching with curiosity. He asks whether the cups are meant to scare away wolves. You smile and tell him that wolves won't be impressed by a few rattling spoons. The boy looks momentarily disappointed before you add that the noise might help wake the grown-ups faster, which he seems to find acceptable. He wanders off, humming softly. You finish adjusting one of the leather ties and look out into the dark prairie. The tall grass shivers lightly under the moon, moving in graceful waves. You feel the vastness again, the way the world stretches beyond the firelight without boundaries. These alarms create small pockets of control, fragile but comforting. A couple approaches carrying a pile of dried sticks. They arrange them carefully into a stumble pile at a narrow gap between wagons, a crude but effective trick. If anything passes through that opening, the sticks will scatter with noise. A story told by one pioneer woman describes placing brittle branches around her bedding every night. When a curious cow stepped on them at dawn, she jumped awake, certain she was being trampled by a buffalo. Her husband laughed for days. Whether the tone of that memory was amusement or irritation is difficult to tell from the retelling, but you can imagine both. Another man joins you at the perimeter, tying a thin strip of metal to the ropes. He says that when the wind blows from the east, animals tend to wander closer. His observation comes from years of traveling westward, and his calm certainty adds a layer of reassurance to the task. You nod, reflecting on how much knowledge could be gathered simply from watching the land closely across months and miles. A quiet chatter begins among the small group now tending the alarm line. They compare stories of nights when they heard something brushing against the rope, only to discover it was a stray dog, a lost traveler, or a sleepy horse wandering away. One woman mentions that her uncle once tied string between tin plates and swore the clatter saved them from a mountain lion. Some modern researchers remain skeptical of how often predators actually approached camps, but the stories survived because the fear did. When the rope is fully lined with cups, spoons, and bits of metal, you step back and admire the odd little creation. It sways gently, clicking softly as the night breeze nudges it. This simple construction offers no true shield, no barrier, no warning loud enough to frighten anything away, but it offers alertness. And sometimes alertness is enough. You return to the center of camp, passing a few people setting up another kind of deterrent. A circle of stones with small gaps between them. If anything kicks the stones while creeping through, the sound will echo against the wagons. One traveler once called this the poor man's watchdog. You smile at the memory and at the creativity of people who made wilderness tools out of almost nothing. You settle onto your blanket again but remain sitting. You want to listen, to learn the difference between natural night sounds and alarm line warnings. The prairie hums steadily with insects. A horse shifts weight. A nearby ox grunts in its sleep. Then a breeze flows through the cups, creating a light tinkling like distant chimes. You breathe more deeply, calming as the pattern registers in your mind. Not long after, a faint clatter breaks the smooth rhythm. You jolt upright. So do two others. Your head snaps toward the rope. You see the cups sway sharply, struck by something moving through the grass. A tense hush falls over the camp. Your hand drifts toward your rifle, but you do not grip it, just prepare. The grass parts. A round shape emerges, waddling toward the wagons. A porcupine. Slow, oblivious, and completely harmless. It sniffs at the ground, bumps one of the sticks, and rustles away. For a moment, the group stares, hardly believing such a tiny creature caused such a spike of adrenaline. Then someone laughs quietly. Relief ripples through your chest, gentle and warming. Even fear can become a shared joke in moments like this. After the excitement fades, the camp returns to calm. You lie back down and gaze at the stars shimmering overhead. The cups along the rope sway again, but this time the sound is just wind. Your eyes grow heavy. The prairie breathes softly. The improvised alarms stand guard not as shields, but as conversation pieces between humans and the dark. And as sleep begins to fold around you once more, you realize that on a trail this vast, safety often came from small noises, clever hands, and the unspoken promise that someone, somewhere in camp, would always be listening. You ease back into your bedding, but this time sleep does not come as quickly. The night is quiet, the alarm steady, the fires low and glowing like sleepy eyes, yet your mind churns. Anxiety on the trail was like another traveler, always present, sometimes whispering, sometimes shouting, sometimes slipping under your blanket and lying beside you. Tonight, it curls up against your ribs, pressing just enough to keep you awake. You inhale slowly, feeling your breath expand against the cool air. You remind yourself that the camp is secure, but the prairie has a way of making you feel small. You roll onto your side, listening to the wind push through the grass. Your heart beats a little too quickly, and you recognize the feeling settlers wrote about it constantly. That restless, uncertain pull in the chest that came when darkness settled and imagination grew teeth. You rise quietly, not wanting to disturb the sleepers around you, and make your way to the faint glow of a dying fire. Its warmth kisses your shins as you crouch beside it. You watch an ember collapse into ash. The glow pulses softly. There is something soothing about flame, even in its last breath. A woman sits nearby, wrapped in two blankets, staring into the fire with wide, thoughtful eyes. You sit down a respectful distance away. She doesn't speak for a moment, then admits she cannot sleep either. She laughs lightly, saying her mind spins when the world goes quiet. It's a confession you understand instantly. Trail diaries often describe nighttime fear as a silent companion. something that trudged along beside travelers, whether they invited it or not. One writer compared anxiety to a shadow stretching across the plains, always a little bigger than expected. You feel that now as the darkness presses gently around the fire's edge. You poke the embers with a stick, stirring a few sparks. The soft crackle eases the tension in your chest. The woman across from you begins humming, barely audible. She says the song is something her mother used to hum when storms rolled in. Not a lullaby, not exactly a prayer, just a pattern that quieted the heart. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the melody settle. A gust of wind moves the grass, and your shoulders jolt before you can stop yourself. The woman smiles knowingly. She tells you about her first night on the trail, when she thought every sound meant danger. She spent hours convincing herself that something was creeping toward the wagons, but at dawn she discovered the culprit was a pair of owls hunting field mice. She laughs again, softer this time. Her honesty feels like a gift. You lean back, resting your palms on the cool earth. One faint, comforting truth from many historical letters stands out. People rarely confessed their anxieties out loud during daylight hours. Pride kept them quiet. But at night, under stars and beside embers, strangers admitted fears they never voiced otherwise. Here and now, you feel that same permission to be human. A young man approaches the fire and sits beside you, rubbing his arms to warm them. He says he wakes often, startled by dreams of wagon accidents or lost cattle. He talks about how the trail reminds him of fragile things, wheels, bones, tempers, plans. His voice trembles slightly. You listen, absorbing his worry as though it were your own. He is not ashamed, he is simply tired. You suspect everyone in the camp carries similar burdens, hidden in the quiet pockets between tasks. You lie back and look at the stars overhead. They blaze sharp and cold against the dark. A subtle fear slips through your mind. How small you are, beneath all that space. Many travelers wrote about the emotional weight of the sky, how its vastness both humbled and unsettled them. Some felt comforted by the constellations they recognized. Others felt dwarfed by their endlessness. Your reaction floats somewhere in between, awed, unsettled, alive. The woman finishes her humming and begins rearranging the blankets around her shoulders. She shares a memory about a man from her previous wagon train who claimed the secret to calming nighttime nerves was to name every sound he heard until each one became familiar. You smile at the idea, turning fear into a catalogue. You try it yourself. Wind in grass, horse snorting, canvas flapping, distant owl call, tin cup clicking on the alarm rope, your own breath. With each sound named, the pressure around your chest softens, loosens, becomes manageable. Maybe that trick has merit after all. You draw your knees up and wrap your arms around them. The man beside you begins tracing shapes in the dirt with his fingertip. Absent-minded, he tells you he sometimes imagines he is back home, lying beside a wood stove, letting its warmth soak into him. He recreates the memory each night until his heartbeat slows. You nod. Many pioneers described building mental rooms, where they could go when fear grew too heavy, a patch of memory that felt safe, no matter where the trail led. A nearby dog wanders over and curls beside your feet. Its warm body and soft breathing ground you instantly. You scratch its ears and feel its tail thump lightly. Animals often soothed human nerves simply by existing. Some historians suggest that camp dogs played an emotional role as important as their practical one. You believe it now as you feel the gentle rise and fall of the dog's breath against your ankle. You stare again into the fire and watch the last ember wink into charcoal. For a moment, only darkness remains. You feel your throat tighten, but then someone adds a fresh twig. A tiny flame catches, flickers, grows just enough to bring a soft glow back to your faces. It is a small thing, a sliver of light, but your anxiety recedes with it. Human beings have always anchored themselves to light in the dark. Even a flame the size of a fingernail can calm the mind. You breathe deeply and feel your pulse settle. The prairie's sounds no longer seem threatening. They melt back into background whispers. Even the sky feels less overwhelming, as though the stars have drawn back slightly to give you space. Eventually, the others rise, yawning softly, returning to their blankets. You stay for a moment longer. The night wraps around you, gentle now, rather than oppressive. You finally stand, stretch, and walk back toward your bedding. You lie down. The earth feels steady beneath you. Your breath flows easier. Your eyelids grow heavy. And this time, sleep comes without resistance, slow, warm, and unafraid. You drift awake to a soft, rhythmic huffing sound, followed by the faint tap of claws on packed earth. At first, in your haze, you think it might be a mule shifting or an ox stretching in its sleep, but then you hear the unmistakable low murmur of a dog, that gentle chuff that sits somewhere between a growl and a sigh. You open your eyes and find a pair of watchful canine shapes moving slowly along the inner edge of the wagon circle. Camp dogs, faithful, scruffy, endlessly alert. You sit up slightly, pulling your blanket around your shoulders, and watch as one of them pauses beside a sleeping traveler, sniffs the air, then moves on with quiet purpose. These animals were more than companions on the Oregon Trail. They were living night guards, early warning systems, and emotional anchors bundled in fur and instinct. You rise to a crouch, careful not to disturb others, and make your way toward the closest dog. Its ears twitch at your approach. You extend your hand slowly, letting it catch your scent. It wags its tail once slow, steady, then sits beside you as though you have been keeping watch together for years. Trail journals often mention dogs taking it upon themselves to patrol camp perimeters at night. Some were trained, many simply acted out of loyalty or natural vigilance. One family wrote fondly of a mutt named Copper, who never slept until the last child closed their eyes, then woke at the slightest movement beyond the wagons. That kind of devotion weaves itself into you as you sit beside the dog now, listening to its soft breaths. You rest your hand on its back. Its fur is thick, matted in spots, warm in others. A scar runs across its shoulder blade, proof of the rough life animals endured on the trail. The dog leans into your touch, but only briefly. Its ears perk, its body tenses. Then it stands again, alert to something you cannot hear yet. You follow its gaze toward the tall grass at camp's edge. The dog gives a low growl, barely audible. Your pulse lifts slightly. You wait. A moment passes. Then, from the grass, comes a small rustle. Not heavy, not hurried. A fox bursts into view, pauses, then scurries away in the opposite direction. The dog's muscles unclench. It snorts once, as if smug with victory. You laugh quietly. The disturbance was minor, but the dog took it seriously. That was their nature, their job, even when no one asked it of them. A man emerges from his blanket across the way, rubbing his eyes. He thanks the dog softly, calling it by name Samson, and scratches its ears. The dog leans into his hand, tail wagging more enthusiastically now that the tension has passed. The man tells you that Samson once drove off a pair of coyotes by barking so fiercely that the animals changed direction before they even reached the wagons. Whether the story is polished by memory or entirely accurate doesn't matter as much as the gratitude in his voice. You walk with him a few steps toward the fire. A couple of glowing embers reveal another dog sleeping curled into a tight ball, nose tucked under its tail. This one is older, its muzzle grey around the edges. When it lifts its head, its eyes are slow and heavy, yet it still gives a faint woof of recognition. The man explains that older dogs on the trail often served as warmth for small children, or as comfort for anxious adults who needed something alive beside them to fall asleep. A sweet thought flickers through you, that people who crossed immense plains cherished the steady heartbeat of a dog just as much as the strength of an ox or the speed of a horse. You walk back toward the perimeter with Samson trotting beside you. The night air feels crisper now, brushed with a scent of sage and lingering moisture. Somewhere to the west, a coyote sings. Samson's head rises immediately. You watch his ears rotate like tiny compass dials. He replies with a low, rumbling bark, not loud enough to wake anyone, but purposeful, a territorial declaration. Many settlers believed that dogs communicated with wildlife in ways humans could not understand. Some accounts describe dogs barking before storms, or refusing to settle when strangers approached long before any person noticed. Whether these stories were rooted in truth or simply human admiration for canine intuition is a question that still interests researchers today. But in this moment, watching Samson freeze and listen to the distant night, you understand why those stories persisted. You and the dog continue patrolling, moving slowly near the ropes and alarm lines. The cups clink softly in the breeze. A horse snorts, raising its head before settling again. Samson checks each animal briefly, sniffing the air, satisfied only when all seems peaceful. You marvel at how naturally he assumes the role of guardian. When you return toward the fire, another traveler emerges with a scrap of dried meat in hand. He bends, offers it to Samson, who accepts it with a grateful chomp. The man tells you about a dog his family once owned, a lanky creature named Pepper whose bark could wake the entire camp, but who cuddled so close to children that they fell asleep with their arms draped around her. He laughed softly at the memory. You see a pattern now. Nearly every person on the trail has a story about a dog losing one, finding one, being saved by one, or simply feeling less alone because one lay beside them on a night much like this. You return to your blanket, Samson still nearby. He sniffs once at your bedding, circles twice, then lies down with his head resting on his paws, not touching you, but close enough that you can feel his presence. You lower yourself beside him, stretching your legs and inhaling the cool air. The prairie hums again. Insects, grass, a stray breeze. The soundscape is familiar now, no longer ominous, and the dog beside you adds another rhythm, steady breathing, soft huffs, a quiet growl every so often as he listens for threats you cannot hear. You rest your fingers lightly on his back. His fur rises and falls. The connection steadies your own pulse, reminding you that fear is quieter when shared. Your eyelids drift closed. Samson remains alert for a few more minutes, ears twitching at distant sounds. Then even he relaxes, trusting the night enough to let his head sink deeper into the grass. The two of you drift into sleep, together human and dog, sharing warmth and watchfulness under the same sprawling sky. You wake to a strange brightness trickling across your eyelids. Not morning, no. The air is still too cold. The camp, far too quiet. You blink yourself upright and realize the moon has risen high and full, draping the prairie in a pale silver wash. For a moment, it almost looks like daylight diluted into something soft and ghost-like. The wagons glow faintly, their canvas turning a pale blue under the moon's wide gaze. Moonlit nights on the Oregon Trail always carried a different mood. They unsettled some travelers and invigorated others. Tonight, you feel caught between both sensations. The world looks clearer than usual, shadows longer yet softer, the distance more visible than you expect at this hour. As you stand and stretch, your muscles complain quietly from the day's miles. You brush dust from your clothes and glance around the camp. A few others have woken too, roused by the strange brightness. A man crouches near the horses, checking their hobbles. A woman sits outside her wagon, her eyes tracing the horizon, as though waiting for something familiar to appear. Your gaze wanders across the shimmering plain. The moonlight makes the grass look like an ocean of tiny silver blades rippling under an invisible tide. You take a slow breath. Nights like this sometimes led wagon trains to reconsider their routines. The question arises, whispered gently into the stillness, should you travel under the moon? It was rare, but it happened. Some parties pushed forward after sundown, when circumstances forced their hand, heat, schedule, illness, the need to reach better ground before morning. You recall reading that intense summer days sometimes drove settlers to take advantage of cooler night hours. A few families claimed they could travel twice as far at night under a full moon, though that claim continues to spark debate among those who study trail logistics. Yet here, bathed in this bright lunar glow, the idea doesn't feel entirely impossible. You walk to the center of camp, where a couple of travelers are speaking in hushed tones. One argues that traveling a short distance tonight could help reach a promising water source by morning. Another shakes his head, insisting the risk is not worth it. You listen quietly. The concerns they voice match countless accounts from the era: losing the trail in darkness, stumbling into ravines, misjudging river crossings, spooking livestock with strange shadows. Even with moonlight, the land changes its face at night. You crouch near the embers, letting their warmth reach your fingers. A woman joins you and remarks softly that moonlit travel always felt uncanny to her. She explains that distances blur, noises distort, and familiar markers transform into eerie shapes. She tells you that her father once led their wagon team a full mile off course because he mistook a moonlit ridge for a riverbank. The mistake cost them half a day of backtracking. You nod, imagining how misleading the landscape could be under this glowing sky. Still, you understand the temptation. You rise and take a few steps beyond the wagon circle. The moonlight creates a path-like pallor, stretching across the grass. You can see depressions in the soil, perhaps remnants of wagon ruts or animal tracks. The shadows they cast look sharper than the shapes themselves. You follow the faint line with your gaze until it disappears near a cluster of brush. Behind you, someone whistles softly. You turn to see a young scout adjusting the straps on his boots. He says moonlit nights always make him feel restless, as though the land is inviting him onward. He half jokes that it is easier to spot danger under a full moon than in thick fog at dawn. His enthusiasm is contagious, though tempered by the caution in his eyes. Scouts relied on instinct, and tonight, his instinct seems alert but uncertain. You step farther from the wagons, letting the cool moonlight brush your face. Somewhere in the distance, an owl glides silently across the brightened sky. Its wings catch the light in a ghostly shimmer. Settlers often interpreted owls as signs of wisdom or warnings, depending on their upbringing. You feel neither omen nor reassurance, just the quiet awe of watching a creature move soundlessly through silver air. A man approaches you from behind, carrying a lantern he has not lit. He says he is considering checking the trail ahead, not to travel, just to look. Some trail veterans recommended scouting under bright moons, because visibility was unusually good. Others warned that moonlit distances often deceived even the sharpest eyes. The man shrugs at the contradiction. Out here, decisions rarely came with guarantees. You follow him a short way toward the edge of the camp. The grass parts softly under your feet. The night smells crisp, cool, a faint mix of damp soil and sage. You stop near a slight rise in the land and look out. The moon makes the prairie look endless and strangely delicate, as though the world has been dipped in pale paint. The man lifts his unlit lantern but does not raise it fully. If only every night looked like this, he whispers. You agree. Nights like this could fool anyone into thinking the trail was gentler than it truly was. A faint rustle interrupts your thoughts. You turn to see a pair of deer emerging from the grass, their slender forms glowing white beneath the moon. They pause, watch you for a moment, then bound away with fluid grace. Their presence feels like a blessing from the landscape itself, a reminder of how much life continues beyond the human world. You and the man return quietly to camp. Most travelers have settled back into their blankets. A couple of guards stand watch, their eyes scanning both shadow and light. No one seems in a hurry to break camp tonight. The debate drifts away, replaced by a collective understanding that the moon, however bright, does not erase the risks of nighttime travel. You settle under your blanket again. The moonlight spills across your bedding like liquid silver. You feel strangely awake, yet calm. The prairie looks less threatening, more serene. The alarms remain in place. The fire's low. The animals asleep. Your heartbeat slows as you breathe deeply. The soft glow of the moon gives everything a dreamlike clarity. You let your head sink into your makeshift pillow. The night wraps around you in a pale, cool embrace. And as your eyes flutter closed, the silver-painted world fades gently, allowing sleep to claim you once more. You sink into sleep again, but it is the uneasy kind, thin as worn fabric. The moon still hangs bright above the prairie, but something in the air has changed. A shift, a hush, a quiet so absolute it feels intentional. You open your eyes and listen, sensing that the camp itself is holding its breath. Tonight, your thoughts drift toward one of the most persistent fears along the Oregon Trail, the idea of nighttime raids. The stories passed between travelers were heavy with drama, whispered warnings around campfires, tense retellings from earlier travelers, and rumors stretched thin across miles of uncertainty. Some settlers believed danger lurked just past the darkness, waiting for the camp to fall deeply asleep. You sit up slowly, adjusting your blanket, and look around. The camp is peaceful. Too peaceful, maybe. You can hear a mule breathing softly, see the faint ember glow, smell the cool mix of grass and river. But your mind keeps circling those old anxieties, those tales that shaped how people slept, how they arranged wagons, how they kept weapons close at hand. Yet even as you feel that tension coil through your chest, you think back to what historians have gathered from letters, diaries, and military reports. Most of those terrifying stories were wildly exaggerated, not meaningless, not foolish, just amplified by fear, distance, and the vastness of the unknown. The idea of raids was far more common than the reality. Real encounters at night were extremely rare, though daytime conflicts did occur in some regions. But the darkness magnified worry into myth. You shift your weight and rise quietly to your feet. A guard stands at the edge of the wagon circle, his silhouette straight and steady. You walk toward him. He glances over, then returns his eyes to the prairie. You ask if he's heard anything. He shakes his head. Just stories running around people's minds, he murmurs. Nothing on the ground. His comment settles something inside you. Many diary entries reveal similar moments, times when travelers admitted that fear of the unknown pressed harder on their hearts than any actual threat. One writer from 1847 confessed that she spent entire nights imagining footsteps approaching, only to discover at sunrise that the camp remained untouched, the prairie calm as a sleeping child. You and the guard stand together at the boundary where lantern light fades into moonlit grass. The wind brushes past your faces. You strain your ears, expecting something dramatic, but you hear only the soft murmur of insects and the distant splash of river water. The reality is quiet. The fear is louder. A man approaches with a blanket draped around his shoulders. He says he cannot sleep because the silence feels false. He remembers an older traveler telling him that silence is when danger thinks. The guard chuckles softly and replies that silence is what the prairie does best. You smile despite yourself. The contrast between fear and reality becomes clearer with every passing minute. The man shares a memory from earlier in the journey, a night when another party nearby claimed to have seen shadows creeping along the riverbank. They panicked, loaded their guns, even moved wagons into a tighter ring. But when the sun rose, they discovered the shadows were stray cattle belonging to a distant rancher. This kind of confusion appears repeatedly in trail writings. Misread shapes, misunderstood sounds, stories retold so often that the original truth softened into legend. You look out across the plains again. The moon paints the grass in silver tones. The land looks impossibly wide, impossibly still. How could such stillness spark so much unease? Perhaps because humans dislike what they cannot see clearly. Perhaps because the emptiness feels too large to trust. Nearby, a woman emerges from her wagon, holding a small lamp. She moves slowly, checking on her children. When she sees you, she gives a tired smile and admits that she woke after dreaming of danger. Dreams, she says. Hold on to fears even when the mind knows better. You nod. It seems the prairie does not just challenge the body, it challenges the imagination. She sets her lamp down near the wagon wheel and sits beside you. She recalls a letter she once read from a cousin who traveled years earlier. He wrote that he never once saw violence in the night but heard stories of it weekly. Even today, scholars analyzing these accounts point out how rumors replaced facts as they traveled faster than wagons ever could. Distance distorted details, and fear filled the gaps. You sit with her and the guard a while longer. The camp remains still. The animals breathe peacefully. No danger creeps through the grass. The prairie feels vast, but not hostile. The unease inside you begins to thin. After some time, a faint laughter drifts from the opposite side of camp. A couple of travelers are awake, quietly sharing a story. The lightness in their voices softens the night further. You feel your muscles relax. The guard steps away to complete another loop around the perimeter. You stay seated, watching the moonlight ripple across the grass. The woman eventually returns to her wagon, her lamp flickering gently as she goes. A sense of calmness settles over everything, as though the night itself has exhaled. You rise slowly, brush dust from your knees, and make your way back to your bedding. As you lie down again, you feel a shift inside your chest, a realization that fear grows in the gaps where knowledge fades. People feared night raids because nighttime magnified every uncertainty. But the truth of the trail was mostly quieter, shaped more by weather, exhaustion, and long distances than by dramatic attacks. You let that truth settle into you. The air cools around your cheeks. A faint breeze sighs through the grass. The dog from earlier curls near your feet again, offering its small, steady warmth. You close your eyes. The prairie holds you gently, no longer shadowed by imagined threat, and sleep returns, peaceful this time, soft as the moonlight drifting over the wagons. You wake again in the deep hours of the night, not because of danger, noise, or discomfort, but because something warm and human lingers in the air. It is the sound of quiet voices, soft, hushed, and threaded with fatigue. You open your eyes to find two figures sitting near the embers, silhouettes leaning toward each other in slow conversation. Their murmurs drift across the camp like small ripples on still water. You sit up, stretching gently, and realize what you're witnessing is one of the most understated but essential parts of life on the Oregon Trail, the creation of tiny midnight communities, not daylight alliances, not formal groups, but after dark bonds forged when the world shrank to the glow of a dying fire, and the shared fears, doubts, and hopes that surfaced only when most people slept. You pull your blanket around your shoulders and walk quietly toward the soft orange glow. As you approach, the two figures pause, then smile when they realize it's only you. They gesture for you to join them. You settle in on the cool ground, feeling the lingering warmth from the coals soak into your palms. One of them, a man with tired eyes and dust still clinging to his sleeves, tells you he couldn't sleep and came to the fire for company. The woman beside him nods, adding that nighttime made her thoughts too loud. So the two began talking, sharing stories of home, little confessions about the trail, and the strange comfort of knowing someone else felt the same weight. These late-night conversations show up often in surviving journals, though briefly and without flourish. Writers mention talking in whispers long after the camp slept, or sharing quiet tales until the fire died. It seems these moments rarely made it into the grander stories of the journey, yet they were essential to keeping spirits steady. They formed the emotional glue that held strangers together when land and distance threatened to pull them apart. You listen as the two beside you recount pieces of their pasts. The man speaks of a younger brother he left behind, a teenager training horses on their family farm. He wonders aloud how the boy is faring. The woman shares a memory of her mother singing while kneading bread, a scent she misses so badly it aches. Neither of these stories are heroic or dramatic, yet each one pulses with a tenderness more grounding than any supply or weapon. A third traveler joins your circle, seated cross-legged with a faint grin. He admits he woke up thirsty, but stayed when he saw the small gathering. Soon he's telling an embarrassing story about falling into a creek during his first week on the trail. Everyone laughs softly, the kind of laughter that warms more deeply than fire. A detail noted in some trail letters speaks of these night hours as the truest time, when people let their fatigue strip away pretenses. Out here, under the stars, no one tried to impress anyone. Goals, hierarchies, and formalities melted. Travelers spoke openly about their fears, or their exhaustion, or their doubts about reaching Oregon at all. You feel that honesty wrapping around your little group now. The woman turns toward you and asks what brought you west. Her tone is gentle, curious rather than probing. You share part of your story, whatever you feel comfortable offering, and she nods with quiet understanding. You realize how rare it is to be heard so fully, especially by near strangers sitting around faint coals. Somewhere nearby, a baby whimpers briefly. The mother murmurs a soothing sound, and all goes quiet again. The night feels thick with shared humanity. A faint breeze brushes your face. Overhead, the stars flicker in slow waves. One traveler leans back and starts tracing constellations with his fingertip, drawing patterns in the air. Another follows suit, pointing out star groups he remembers from childhood. You watch their fingers sweep across the sky, and you feel a swelling connection to those who once sat on this same land doing exactly this, decades before you. A small anecdote from an old emigrant diary comes to mind. One writer described how a group of night watchers began mapping constellations in the dust when the sky clouded over. They recreated the heavens beneath their feet so they wouldn't feel lost. The creativity of tired humans never fails to move you. Beside you, someone stretches, groaning softly. Conversation lapses into a comfortable quiet. No one rushes to fill the silence. It simply rests between you, warm and alive. You stare at the glowing embers. Their light is gentle, but enough to show half smiles, thoughtful eyes, and the slow rise and fall of tired chests. This small circle could be a family for these few hours. The night has a way of doing that, shrinking distances not just on the ground, but between hearts. One of the travelers rubs his hands together and says that nights like this made the trail bearable. Not the good weather, not the miles covered, not even the moments of triumph. It was this: companionship in the dark, the reminder that even when fear pressed in close, others sat beside you, breathing the same cold air, hoping for the same dawn. Another nods, adding that the trail was too long to walk emotionally alone. People needed someone to listen, someone to laugh with, someone to share a fear or a foolish thought with at 2 a.m. Scholars who study immigrant communities note that these microbonds, short-lived yet sincere, kept morale surprisingly strong across endless miles. As the embers dim further, the group begins to quietly disperse. One by one, they rise, stretch, and murmur goodnight. Each returns to their bedding with a slightly lighter heart. You are the last to rise. You look around at the wagons, the animals, the sleeping silhouettes, and you realize how different the camp feels now. Softer, more connected. You walk back to your blanket, lie down, and pull the fabric over your shoulders. The night no longer feels cold or empty. It feels shared, threaded with voices and stories still warm in your memory. Your eyes close. The small community dissolves into dreams, and the prairie, wide and quiet, holds all of you gently as you slip into deeper sleep. You tumble awake to a sound so small it almost folds back into silence, a muted thud followed by a muffled curse. At first, you assume it's someone shifting in their sleep, but then another sharp clack echoes through the darkness. Not loud, not alarming, just inconvenient. You sit up, rubbing your face with cold hands, and realize the camp is stirring too. The prairie has not threatened you tonight, but the camp itself has begun offering its own brand of trouble. Accidents in the dark were some of the most common hazards settlers faced, far more frequent than dramatic dangers. You rise carefully, mindful of where you place your feet. Nighttime transforms ordinary objects, wagon wheels, loose planks, drop tools into traps waiting to catch bare toes or sleepy ankles. You walk toward the source of the noise and find a man crouched beside a wagon, wincing as he holds his shin. A wooden crate lies toppled beside him, its lid pried halfway open by the force of the stumble. He manages a rueful smile when you approach. "Forgot I set that there," he mutters, rubbing the spot where he struck himself. You help him push the crate back under the wagon, making sure it won't roll free again. His embarrassment fades as quickly as the night mishaps humbled even the most experienced travelers. A soft rustle draws your attention to the left. Someone has tripped over a bundle of rope coiled near a hammer. She stands now, arms crossed, glaring at the rope as though it personally offended her. When she notices your amused expression, she sighs and admits her own fault. She thought she knew the camp layout better than the night allowed. These little confessions sit at the heart of many trail recollections, quiet reminders that exhaustion turns even sturdy people clumsy. You walk with her toward the fire. A faint glow still pulses beneath the ash, enough to light the ground immediately around it. You crouch beside the embers, warming your hands, and she settles onto an overturned bucket. She tells you about a night earlier in the journey, when she kicked a wagon tongue in the dark and cried out so loudly the guards leapt to action, thinking danger had arrived. When they realized the culprit was her shin and nothing else, they teased her for days. You wince in sympathy. The camp around you begins to murmur with other soft disturbances. A mule snorts violently, jolted awake after stepping into a shallow depression. A man curses when he bangs his elbow against the edge of a wagon bed. Somewhere deeper in the circle, a child cries briefly after rolling onto a sharp pebble. You stand again and scan the area. The moon has dipped lower now, giving the night a muted, bluish tone. Shadows are softer but thicker, harder to interpret. Your mind drifts to an account you once read, describing how settlers often tied small markers, strips of cloth, hanging spoons, even knotted twine along the ground to help guide their feet between sleeping spots and the fire. These improvised pathways helped on moonless nights but often became tangled hazards of their own. As you step carefully around a saddle left too close to a wagon wheel, you reflect on how night blindness played tricks on the prairie. A perfectly clear path in daylight became a maze in half darkness. Even experienced travelers misjudged distances, thinking they were stepping over a rut only to plant their foot directly in it. A sudden commotion rises near the livestock. You hurry closer, heart jumping, but when you arrive, the tension dissolves. One of the oxen had simply backed into a stake, shaking the tether line and sending a few stones tumbling. The animal stands now, blinking sleepily. A young boy crouches beside it, laughing breathlessly from the scare. You breathe easier too. These were the sorts of emergencies that filled trail nights, not dramatic threats, but simple missteps, misunderstandings, and tired bodies fumbling in the dark. Near the wagon circle's outer edge, you find a man kneeling beside a broken wooden bucket. He holds two pieces of its rim, examining them in frustration. The bucket must have cracked under someone's weight. He mutters that repairs will have to wait until dawn. You help him gather the splintered pieces, stacking them neatly so no one cuts themselves on the jagged ends. He thanks you and trudges back toward his blankets. A soft thud sounds behind you. You turn to see a woman sitting stunned on the ground, rubbing her hip. She admits she misjudged where the wagon wheel ended and slipped. You offer your hand, helping her to her feet. She laughs at her own clumsiness, then hobbles toward her bedroll. Her good humor reminds you how often settlers had to laugh to keep worry at bay. As you move across camp, you take greater care, placing each step with intention. The ground, though flat in daylight, now hides small dips and ridges. A stray piece of firewood almost turns your ankle. You steady yourself, feeling the adrenaline flicker through your chest. You look around and imagine the countless journals where travelers wrote about stepping on nails, snagging skirts on wagon hardware, bumping heads on low beams, or bruising shins on barrels. These moments rarely made it into the grand retellings of the westward journey, but they shaped the daily reality of it. Nighttime accidents were as much a part of the voyage as river crossings and mountain passes. You pause near a wagon and lean against its cool wooden side. A memory floats up, a small note from a pioneer mother who wrote about her son tumbling into a cooking pot at dusk because he misjudged its placement. She said the boy emerged with more stew on him than inside him. Stories like that reveal how humor often softened the rough edges of trail life. But not every mishap was harmless. A man once recounted waking in the dark and stepping onto a coiled rope he didn't see. It whipped forward, startling his team, and the wagon lurched just enough to throw someone inside. You exhale slowly, thinking how fragile every night could be if luck parted ways with caution. As you step back into the fire's halo, you notice a woman carefully clearing the ground around her bedding again, removing rocks she somehow missed earlier. You kneel to help her. Together, you push aside small stones, smooth tufts of grass, and straighten the blanket. She thanks you, explaining that one sharp pebble in the wrong spot can ruin an entire night's rest. You nod. Comfort mattered as much as caution. The last of the small disturbances fade. People settle again. You return to your own blanket, mindful of every object near your feet. As you lower yourself down, you hear someone mutter from across camp. One day, I'll sleep inside a real room again, with a proper floor and no rogue buckets. A few quiet chuckles respond. You lie back, adjusting your blanket. The ground feels cool and familiar beneath your spine. You inhale deeply, letting the crisp night air fill your lungs. Accidents in the dark, annoying, painful, inconvenient, remind you that danger on the trail didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, or bumped, or tripped you lightly just to see if you were paying attention. The prairie settles once more. A breeze sighs through the grass. You close your eyes carefully, determined not to knock anything over. Sleep comes slowly but steadily, carrying with it the quiet resilience built from every stumble, bump, and bruise the night has offered. You wake to a different kind of quiet. Not fear, not tension, just the awareness that the land beneath you has shifted again. You stretch slowly, the cold morning dew clinging to your blanket, and the familiar prairie scent has changed. The air feels crisper, thinner, carrying a hint of pine you hadn't noticed before. When you sit up, the horizon reveals the subtle rise of distant hills, shadows layered like folded fabric. Tonight, your sleep will take place in a landscape no longer endless and flat, but textured, varied, and full of new challenges. Travelers often describe this part of the journey as a transition zone, where the open plains began blending into rolling terrain, foothills, and eventually mountains. With each shift in landform came a shift in how people slept. You rise, brushing off grass, and look around at the camp. Everything is familiar, yet the setting changes its meaning. The wagons have settled unevenly on sloped ground. Bedrolls have slid during the night. A few people rub sore shoulders from sleeping at odd angles. You step out of the wagon circle and feel the incline beneath your boots. Not steep, but noticeable. The tall grass of earlier nights thins into patches, replaced by shrubs and small rocky outcrops. The soundscape has changed too. The whispering sea of prairie grass has quieted, replaced by a faint rustle of leaves and the distant creak of branches shifting in the breeze. A woman near you calls out that her bedding slipped halfway down a gentle slope, and she woke staring at the wheels of someone else's wagon. She laughs at the absurdity, but you can hear the fatigue behind the humor. Sleeping on uneven ground required new strategies, wedging blankets, stacking gear as barriers, bracing yourself against wagon wheels so your body wouldn't slide. Trail accounts frequently mention this adjustment period. People accustomed to sleeping on flat prairie soil found themselves fumbling on irregular ground, discovering that rocks hid beneath thin layers of dirt, or that inclines made their legs ache by morning. Some settlers learned to dig shallow grooves in the earth to keep their bodies from drifting downhill at night. Others placed saddles, crates, or even piles of clothing on the lower side of their blankets as makeshift anchors. You walk toward a pair of travelers, now moving rocks away from their sleeping spot. One mutters that this land seems determined to poke holes in everyone's comfort. You help them roll a sizable stone out of the way, feeling its cool weight under your palms. When you drop it beside a bush, it lands with a hollow thud. They thank you and remark that the mountains, though still distant, seem eager to announce their presence. As the sun dips again toward evening, people begin preparing for another night, one that will unfold in terrain far less forgiving than the soft plains. You feel the dry crunch of pebbles under your boots as you gather firewood. Twigs snap sharply, echoing between small rises in the land. The sound carries further than on the open prairie, bouncing lightly off the hillside. You pause, noticing the difference. Sound behaves strangely here, as though the land plays tricks with distance. A man nearby mentions he once heard a branch crack on a night like this and was convinced someone or something was approaching the camp. In the morning, he found a squirrel perched on a fallen log, looking entirely unbothered. Whether his senses were distorted by exhaustion or by the unique acoustics of rolling terrain is something enthusiasts still discuss today, with no firm conclusion. When the campfires flicker to life, their glow feels more contained. The land here cups the light differently. Shadows pool deeper, folding over rocks and shrubs. You help adjust lanterns, placing them where they'll illuminate paths without casting confusing silhouettes. Travelers in hill country often committed considerable thought to lantern placement, knowing that deceptive shadows could make an ordinary shrub appear like a crouching figure or a harmless boulder resemble a lurking shape. As you prepare your bedding, you notice the earth beneath your hand is firmer than the soft prairie soil you left behind. It holds cold longer too. A chill creeps upward from the ground, sharper than before. You settle your blankets over a shallow dip and use your pack as a brace behind your knees. You lie back experimentally. The land feels uneven, but you adjust, shifting your body until the ground's contours match your shape. Someone coughs behind you and mutters about how the chill of higher elevations sinks into your bones while you sleep. They pull an extra blanket over their shoulders and suggest heating a stone by the fire to place under bedding, an old trick in cold regions. Whether this method was truly effective varies in accounts, but many families swore by it. A few travelers gather on a nearby rise, silhouetted against the dimming sky. They point toward the hazy outlines of mountains far ahead. Those peaks carry both promise and warning. They remind you that the journey's most formidable terrain lies ahead, and that sleeping in safety would require new layers of caution. You walk up the small rise, feeling the steeper angle tug at your calf muscles. The grass is patchy here, replaced by flat stones and exposed dirt. Tiny insects flit around your ankles. As you look out toward the distant mountains, you feel the enormity of the land rising like a tide before you. The plains behind you feel distant, almost dreamlike. Returning to camp, you notice another change: the sounds of wildlife. On the prairie, animals moved in fluid, sweeping arcs. Here, their movement feels more abrupt, hidden, unpredictable. The shrubs rustle differently. The insects chirp with a sharper rhythm. A distant howl echoes longer, bouncing between faint hills instead of drifting freely into the horizon. You settle back down on your blankets and draw them tight around your shoulders. The ground beneath you feels uneven, yes, but solid. You listen to the wind threading itself through shrubs and rocks. You marvel at how each night demands a slight shift in mindset, how settlers learn to read their surroundings and mold their habits to fit whatever the terrain offered. Your eyelids grow heavy. The land settles with you. The hills watch quietly. And in the cradle of this subtly shifting country, neither prairie nor mountain, yet fully becoming both, you drift gently into sleep, shaped by the contours of everything around you. You wake once more, but this time it is not a noise or a dream, or even the shifting of the ground that pulls you from sleep. It is your own body. Your limbs feel heavy in a way that is not unpleasant, just final, as though every muscle has surrendered. You roll onto your back and stare at the fading stars. The sky looks pale and washed out, hinting that dawn isn't far. You exhale slowly, feeling the long, accumulated weight of the trail settle deeper into your bones. Exhaustion out here becomes its own sort of shelter. You notice it now more clearly than ever. The more the miles pile up, the less room your mind has left for fear. Settlers wrote about this exact sensation, how by the middle stretch of the journey, fatigue became such a constant companion that even the most anxious travelers fell asleep quickly, often in the middle of conversations, chores, or quiet watch shifts. The body learned to override worry simply because it had no energy to spare. You push yourself upright, joints complaining softly. The camp is still mostly asleep. The fires burn down to soft orange glows that look like embers dreaming of daylight. A man stirs a few wagons away, yawns, and collapses back onto his blanket. You smile, recognizing the familiar posture of someone who meant to wake but didn't quite win the battle. You rise and stretch. Your spine pops audibly. You wince, but the relief afterward is delicious. You stand for a moment, letting the early air cool the heat of your skin. The breeze slips through your shirt, brushing your back like cold fingertips. You turn your head slowly, cataloguing each muscle's response. Your legs feel stiff, weighted. Your feet have grown numb to the nightly aches. Your shoulders carry a dull throb from lifting, pushing, hauling. Yet somehow, this exhaustion brings a strange clarity, a soft steadiness. As you wander toward what remains of the night's fire, you find a woman already there. She sits cross-legged, hair tangled from sleep, elbows resting on her knees. She looks half awake, half dreaming. You sit beside her without speaking. She glances your way and smiles with glassy eyes. "Funny thing," she murmurs. "Once you're tired enough, even fear has to wait its turn." You chuckle gently. Her words echo what many trail diaries described: exhaustion, flattening danger. People learn to sleep through howling coyotes, rattling wagon wheels, shifting livestock, even storms pounding the canvas tops, simply because their bodies demanded surrender. The fire crackles softly as you poke the ash. A few sparks flutter upward, tiny fireflies of orange light. They drift into the air and vanish. You watch them disappear and feel the heaviness in your arms, the kind that signals a body pushed near its limits, yet still capable of one more day. A young man stumbles toward the fire, rubbing his face vigorously. He complains that he fell asleep sitting upright and woke with his forehead on his knees. You grin sympathetically. He adds that he doesn't even remember lying down the night before. This aligns perfectly with countless accounts where settlers describe dropping off mid-sentence or waking, with no recollection of closing their eyes. It wasn't carelessness. It was pure survival instinct: rest where and when you can, because dawn will demand everything. As he speaks, a mule brays loudly, startling him so badly he almost trips. You laugh with him this time. Exhaustion blunts nerves but doesn't eliminate surprise. He mutters something about switching sleeping sides because his whole left leg went numb. You nod knowingly. The ground imprints itself onto you after a while. Days of walking, nights of sleeping on soil shaped by rocks and ridges, it all adds up. You listen as another traveler joins the group and says she fell asleep while boiling water the previous evening. The pot overflowed, extinguishing her small fire. When she woke, she thought rain had fallen. You shake your head in amused disbelief. But the story rings true. Trail fatigue made people inventive in mistakes as much as in solutions. A detail from one mid-19th century letter lingers in your mind. A woman wrote that she feared nothing after a month on the trail, except a day without sleep. Every other danger seemed manageable next to the bone-deep drag of exhaustion. Some modern historians who study pioneer health reflect on that sentiment, noting how fatigue altered behavior, judgment, and perception far more than external threats ever did. You stand and stretch again, arms reaching toward a sky slowly shifting from indigo to pale violet. Your body cracks and protests, but the release feels right. You've grown used to this cycle: push, rest, push again. The monotony becomes a strange comfort, a rhythm that steadies the mind even as it drains the muscles. A few wagons away, someone collapses halfway into their bedroll with a groan so dramatic it echoes across the camp. "I could sleep standing up," they mutter loudly. A tired chorus answers, "Try it. Let us know how it turns out." Soft laughter drifts across the circle. These humor-tinged complaints appear in so many journals that they feel timeless. A mother emerges from her wagon, yawning so hard her entire body shakes. She gently wakes her children, who protest with muffled noises. One child tries to crawl back under the blanket and dissolves into a whining heap. She scoops the little one into her lap and rocks them gently. Even her motions carry the heavy slowness of exhaustion. You see her blinking rapidly, fighting to keep awake long enough to tend to her morning chores. A dog ambles toward you, tail wagging lazily. It flops beside your feet with a long, exaggerated sigh, as though it too has done the work of an entire team of oxen. You scratch behind its ears. Its warmth grounds you. Even animals, you remember, suffered fatigue-worn hooves, strained muscles, aching joints, yet they moved forward each day, driven by instinct rather than choice. You wander slightly beyond the wagons, toward a small rise in the land. The ground is still chilly under your soles. You place your hand on your thigh as you climb. At the top, you inhale deeply. The horizon glows faintly, the first hint of morning brushing the edge of the world. This moment is where exhaustion transforms into endurance, the quiet before demands return, the breath between hardship and the next step, the body rebuilt just enough to move again. You feel your eyelids droop even as you stand. The land is peaceful, still, You could fall asleep leaning against this hill if you let yourself, but instead, you close your eyes for a long, slow blink that borders on dreaming. When you open them again, you step back toward camp. The world is waking, slowly. People move with the sluggish choreography of bodies running on borrowed strength, but they move. And you move too. Because out here, exhaustion doesn't defeat you, it becomes the very thing that helps you rest, the weight that finally presses your mind into quiet. You return to your bedding, lie down one last time, and let the prairie cradle what remains of your strength. Your heartbeat slows, the sky lightens. And for a few precious minutes, before dawn fully arrives, sleep takes you once more deep, heavy, and strangely comforting. You wake to the softest hint of morning, a pale silver glow that settles over the camp like a final exhale. Your body feels bruised by sleep and softened by it at the same time. You push yourself upright, rubbing your face, and for a moment you wonder why this dawn feels different. Then the realization comes slowly, like sunlight creeping across the earth. You are nearing the end of the trail. Oregon is no longer a distant idea whispered around fires. It's close now, close enough that the horizon itself seems to hum with it. You rise and step away from your bedding, stretching stiff shoulders. The air feels colder than yesterday. The light feels clearer. You look toward the west, where the faint silhouettes of trees gather on the horizon, marking the beginning of the fertile lands so many travelers dreamed of. After months of sleeping on plains, near rivers, among tall grasses, beside hills, and under storms, you are finally approaching a place where safety might look different, more grounded, less improvised. The camp stirs slowly. A man groans as he sits up, rubbing his neck. A woman folds her blanket with quiet satisfaction, as though today's sunrise carries extra meaning. The children wake more eagerly, sensing hope in the adults' movements. Even the livestock seem to shift with new energy, hooves brushing the ground with impatience. You wander toward what remains of last night's fire. It's a shallow glow now, barely warm, but it feels symbolic, an echo of all the nights you've endured. Nights spent circling wagons, placing alarms, calming children, guarding animals, debating firelight, adapting to storm and silence, and shifting landscapes. Nights spent with strangers who became companions. Nights that shaped the very rhythm of days. A woman approaches and sits beside you, pulling her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She smiles softly and says she barely slept, too full of excitement. Then she admits something more fragile, something that echoes across countless accounts from the era. She feels a kind of grief, too, for the trail, for the nights that frightened her and strengthened her and taught her who she could be. Reaching Oregon promised safety, land, and stability, yet it also meant leaving behind the strange, harsh intimacy of life on the road. You nod, feeling the same quiet contradiction forming inside your own chest. Nearby, a man gathers his things with precise care, moving slower than usual. When you ask if he's tired, he chuckles and says he's savoring the morning because it's one of the last he'll spend sleeping under open sky. His voice carries wistfulness. He explains that while he craves a real bed, a sturdy roof, and a closed door, he knows he'll never look at nighttime the same way once he leaves the trail. Out here, sleep meant awareness, improvisation, adaptation. It meant trusting the land even when it felt indifferent. You stand and walk toward the edge of camp, feeling the ground change under your boots. The soil looks darker, richer. Grass thickens. The wind shifts, carrying a hint of moisture and forest scent. You can almost imagine what it will be like to pitch a bedroll beside tall fir trees rather than open prairie, to sleep beside streams running clear and cold instead of muddy riverbanks. As you look outward, memories from earlier nights flutter into your mind like pages of a journal someone left open in the breeze. You remember the tense hours waiting for storms to pass, the gentle lullabies sung by exhausted parents, the way bison moved silently at dusk, the glow of fireflies floating among the grasses, the muffled coughs of the sick and the quiet relief when their breathing eased, the soft clink of tin alarms, the warmth of dogs lying beside your feet, the fierce moonlight that turned the world silver, the shadows that played tricks on your imagination, the laughter shared around embers, the stumble and chaos of nighttime accidents, the restless hope carried up foothills, the deep, consuming exhaustion that finally dissolved fear. All of it lives inside you now. You take another step into the rising light and realize that sleeping safely on the Oregon Trail was never just about circling wagons or keeping rifles close. It was about paying attention to the land, to your companions, to your own limits. It was about knowing when to trust silence and when to prepare for noise. It was about sharing warmth, sharing stories, sharing watch duty, and sharing vulnerability in a place that stripped everyone down to their truest selves. A small group gathers to watch the eastern sky as it catches fire with dawn. Orange light spills across the wagons, turning canvas into glowing lanterns. Someone nearby says quietly that this might be the last sunrise they greet as travelers rather than settlers. The camp falls into a gentle hush at those words. You sit on a low mound of earth, breathing deeply. The cold air cleans your lungs. The light warms your face. Your blanket still carries the faint scent of long nights' smoke, sweat, dust, river water, crushed grass. Soon, you'll pack it away for the last time. But right now, you let it cling to your shoulders like a memory that doesn't yet want to be folded. People begin moving faster, preparing for the final stretch. Harnesses click, coffee simmers, tools clink. The camp transitions from sleep to readiness with practiced ease. You watch it all as though watching a familiar story reach its closing pages. Before you join the bustle, you take one final walk along the perimeter. The grass glitters with dew. Birds call softly from unseen branches. A fox skitters into a thicket, pausing only once to glance your way. The world feels full of beginnings. You return to camp and gather your bedding. As you roll it tightly, your hands pause, holding the worn fabric. You think of every night this blanket helped you make sense of the dark. Every night you wrapped it around your shivering body. Every night it absorbed fear and comfort in equal measure. One traveler approaches with a gentle grin. "Ready for Oregon?" he asks. You glance toward the brightening horizon. "Yes," you say, and not quite. Because the trail is ending, but the memory of its nights will follow you, settled deep into your bones, into your breath, into the part of you that now understands how humans endure when the world feels too large. You shoulder your pack, step into the morning light, and let the long shadow of your past nights fall softly behind you. The world grows quieter now, gentler, softened at the edges, as though someone has lowered the lights on the great stage of the trail. You breathe slowly, letting the rise and fall of your chest match the calm rhythm settling across the land. The last traces of dawn stretch thin, blending into soft daybreak, and you feel your tired body loosen, uncoil, and finally ease. You picture yourself sitting at the edge of your final camp, the grass cool beneath your palms, the wind brushing your cheek with a touch that asks nothing from you. No danger, no distance, no decisions left to make, only rest. Deep, warm, simple rest. Let your mind drift, the way the prairie's songs drift across open ground. Let the sounds fade, gradually, gently, until all that remains is the quiet heartbeat of the earth beneath you. You feel it now steady, patient, endlessly welcoming. You close your eyes, imagining the wagons settling into stillness one last time, the animals breathing steadily, the fire sighing itself into embers. Every worry, every ache, every sharp edge of memory smooths itself out, growing softer with each exhale. You have walked far. You have earned this stillness. Breathe in, breathe out. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let sleep approach like a slow-moving river. The night, the stars, the whispering grass, they linger only as comfort now, not caution. You carry them with you, but lightly, the way a distant melody hums in the back of your mind, long after the song has finished. You are safe. You are warm. You are done for the night. And as your thoughts dissolve into softness, the trail fades behind you, and dreams rise gently to meet you.